Chapter 710. When the Japanese Tiantai sect monks saw Imagawa Kagumo falling to the ground, some of them who could still move immediately rushed to him and held him up, crying out loud. Imagawa Kagumo spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as a sheet as he fell to the ground. After he was supported by the middle-aged monk, he faintly felt as if someone was shouting something at him. He struggled to open his eyes and forced a smile at the middle-aged monk in front of him. He reached out his hand and caressed the monk's head. Then he recited a passage from the Dharma Sutra. The Holy Lord, the King of Dharma, comforts the infinite. When I die you shall not be afraid. After reciting, Imagawa Kagumo panted and said, After I die, I can appoint Takacho Yukino as the sect leader. Please support me. Unfortunately, none of you can truly inherit my legacy. It's a pity that I'm leaving. Also, Hideyoshi, remember to restrain your disciples when you go back. Don't let them take revenge for me. As long as this person doesn't become an immortal in China and doesn't die, none of you are allowed to step on this land. Remember, remember, remember. The middle-aged monk named Hideyoshi was shocked and said angrily, Sect leader, you'll be fine. What do you mean by that? Why can't we take revenge? What? Imagawa Kagumo smiled and said in a low and slow voice, Now that I've seen the world, I've become a Buddha in peace. I'm happy that I've gained something good. The masses are always troubled, the blind have no teacher. They don't know the path of suffering, they don't know how to seek relief. The long night increases evil and reduces the number of people in the heavens. From the underworld to the underworld, I'll never hear the name of Buddha. He recited the Dharma Sutra in a low voice, and his voice gradually became softer. When he reached the last word, the smile on his face froze and he stopped breathing. He passed away on the spot. Hideyoshi could faintly feel that the scripture recited by his master before he passed on seemed to have a deep meaning, but at that moment, his heart was filled with grief and he did not have time to think about it. He knelt down in front of Imagawa Kagumo, prostrated himself on the ground and started crying loudly. The rest of the monks from the Tiantai sect who had not fainted also burst into tears. For a moment, the sound of crying could be heard in the Longhu Taoist field. Li Yundong had used the power of Jinshin to break the thunder retribution. The cultivators of all sects in China were both shocked and delighted. Although there were cultivators of the Tiantai sect who were crying and crying, they were all smiling and whispering to each other about the earth-shattering battle just now, exchanging their own experiences with each other. Zhuangzi looked at Li Yunyang in awe and said in a low voice, Jinshin breaking through the thunder tribulation happened more than 200 years ago. I didn't expect that I would be able to witness it with my own eyes today. Li Wudi lives up to his reputation. Mao Yuchang looked at the man who was younger than her with a complicated gaze. She opened her mouth to say something but in the end she didn't say anything. Li Yundong was panting heavily in the field. This battle was the most dangerous and intense one he had ever had since he started cultivating. His Jinchi was strong and his spiritual power was powerful. He was unparalleled in the world. Even when he had been fighting with people on Mount Tianlong, he had never felt tired. But at this time his whole body was trembling slightly. He could even clearly feel that his 2 waste kidneys had been drained to the point of pain. It was obvious that the previous fight had consumed a lot of his essence, qi and blood. He was already a little overdrawn. Li Yundong took a deep breath and used his breathing to slowly adjust the chaotic qi and blood in his body. His originally flushed and abnormal face gradually calmed down. At this time, Li Yundong recalled the battle just now and couldn't help but have a trace of doubt in his heart. Logically speaking, the other party was also in the Thunder Retribution realm. Even if he couldn't hold on, there was no reason for him to lose so quickly. Especially with the support of the magic formation, he was immediately defeated after a series of fierce attacks. Li Yundong had an old injury, and he had taken advantage of it? Li Yundong was about to ask when he saw Hideyoshi pick up the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo and glare at Li Yundong fiercely. He wiped away his tears and strode to the side of the field. Li Yundong glanced at him and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He had no intention of stopping him. Although the two sides were enemies, Li Yundong still admired Imagawa Kagumo's cultivation. Although he didn't know who Imagawa Kagumo had learned the Mahamudra Kung Fu from, the other party's mastery of the Mahamudra Kung Fu was deep and his skill was pure. It was above and not below him. Ziyuan, who was at the side of the field, saw this scene. She sighed softly and said, Alas, Li Yundong has made another enemy. Xinyan Tantrism, Pure Land True Sect, and Tiantai Sect are the 3 strongest sects of Japanese Buddhism. He has offended all of them. How can this be? Zhou Qin had a strong personality. She raised her eyebrows and said, We'll deal with it when it comes. Are we afraid of these little Japanese? If they want to fight, then we'll fight. Ziyuan shook her head and said, It's not good, it's not good. As the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. These three sects almost represent the power of the Japanese Buddhist cultivation world. No matter how powerful Li Yundong is, it's impossible for him to withstand their continuous challenges in the future. If this goes on, there will be endless troubles. If Li Yundong still wants to cultivate quietly, it will be wishful thinking. Zhou Qin was a little unconvinced and argued, Is it better to lose? There's no point in giving in to these Japanese. Only by beating them into submission, defeating them, and beating them into submission will they truly be at peace. As she said this, she turned to Su Chan and said, Su Chan, tell me who's right between us. Su Chan looked at Ziyuan and then at Zhou Qin. Suddenly she smiled and said, Both of you are right and wrong. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan both looked at her curiously and asked, What do you mean? Su Chan smiled and said, In my opinion, as the saying goes, if one's heart is in one place, there will be 84,000 tribulations. In the world of the three realms, there is only one true method. It's useless to say this now. It's important to see what Yundong thinks, says and does. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan both laughed. Zhou Qin pointed at Su Chan and said with a smile, Ha, isn't this the sutra? After watching a battle, you can actually learn and apply it on the spot. Amazing. No wonder Master likes you so much. You're so sweet and good at talking. Ziyuan also smiled and looked at Li Yundong. Although her expression was no longer solemn, there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. Su Chan giggled and said, Not at all. I still have to learn more from Sister Ziyuan and Sister Zhou Qin. By the way, why didn't Imagawa Kagumo's yang spirit come out after he died? Seeing that Li Yundong had won consecutive victories, Zhou Qin also relaxed a lot. She said to Su Chan with a smile, I don't know either. You have to ask our great Jinren Ziyuan. Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, Buddhist cultivators don't pay attention to ascension. Apart from fighting, they almost never leave their yang spirits unless their physical bodies are destroyed. Otherwise, even if they die in meditation, the yang spirits will remain in their physical bodies until they are cremated. Only then will their yang spirits be thrown back into the samsara realm to be reincarnated. Because of this, many eminent monks' golden bodies are cremated after they die, and there are often many relics left behind. This is the product of the cremation of the yang spirit when it wraps around the body. Only then did the two of them understand. When they looked at the field again, Hideyoshi walked to the side of the field with the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo in his arms. After a few loud words with Saionji Tsunekatsu, he and the other monks of the Tiantai sect walked to the side of the field with the injured disciples and recited scriptures for Saionji Tsunekatsu. Saionji Tsunekatsu looked at them worriedly. Two of the three pillars of Japanese Buddhism had been lost, and only the Jinyin Tantrism had not yet made a move. They were the only ones left, and it was difficult for them to do anything alone. At this time, when the cultivators of various sects in Japan saw that Imagawa Kagumo, a master of thunder retribution, had died in front of them, their hearts were so heavy that they couldn't speak. After a long time, a cultivator from the Dashang sect of Japanese Shintoism said angrily, Are we going to stop here? Everyone, it doesn't matter if we are defeated, but our Japanese cultivation world has been defeated by the same person one after another. Can we bear such humiliation? Is there no one else who will rise up again? They were really shocked by Li Yundong's fighting methods. In the first round, Li Yundong had shown that he was not afraid of any Buddhist magic power and that his jinchi was strong and fierce. In the second round, Li Yundong had shown his exquisite fighting methods and outstanding wit. In the third round, Li Yundong had simply defeated the strong with the weak. His jinshin had broken the thunder retribution. This battle not only showed Li Yundong's wisdom and courage, but also let everyone see the majestic and vigorous jinchi of Li Yundong. In their opinion, without a cultivation as vast as the sea, it was absolutely impossible to persist in such a fighting environment, let alone defeat a master of thunder retribution. Fighting with such an opponent, it was really frightening. Seeing that there was no response from the crowd, the cultivator's face was full of grief and indignation. He then shouted loudly, Are we going to let Li Yundong use our failure as the cornerstone to build his invincible reputation? Don't you feel ashamed? I don't believe that Li Yundong is really invincible, Li. At this time Isi Chuyun, who was like an iceberg, said, I saw that Li Yundong was still overdrawn in the battle just now. At this time, if there is another master, he will definitely not be able to hold on. Even if he wins again by luck, it will definitely be a Pyrrhic victory. If he fights in a wheel formation, he will definitely be defeated. When the cultivators of the various sects in Japan heard this, their eyes lit up. They all knew that although Ise Chuyun's character was as cold as ice and she didn't like to talk much, as long as she spoke, she would definitely be right. The cultivator who had spoken before suddenly became spirited and said loudly, "Miss Chuyun is right. Let me pave the way for you in the next round." Immediately, someone advised, "Otsuka, your cultivation is no match for Li Yundong. It's dangerous for you to go on stage." Otsuka said angrily, "Compared with the face of our Japanese cultivation world, my life is nothing." After that, he was about to go on stage, but as soon as he moved, he saw an arm in front of him. It was Sayonji Tsunekatsu who had stopped him. Otsuka was stunned. Just as he was about to scold him angrily, he heard Sayonji Tsunekatsu say, "Otsuka, I have a feud with Li Yundong. Leave this to me." Otsuka stared at him for a long time, then bowed and said, "I wish you victory." Sayonji Tsunekatsu put his palms together and returned the salute. "Thank you, thank you." Although Ise Xingguang appreciated Li Yundong at this time, it was a matter of the overall situation. He didn't dare to be careless, so he warned Sayonji Tsunekatsu, "Chongqing, Li Yundong is almost an arrow at the end of its flight. When you go on stage, you must attack fiercely. Remember, don't give him a chance to breathe." Ise Chuyun also warned, "Chongqing Jun, Li Yunyang is the reincarnation of Wisdom King. Only people with a high cultivation level can beat him with the power of Buddhism. Your cultivation is about the same as his. Don't compete with him in terms of Dharma power. Focus on close combat." Sayonji Tsunekatsu respectfully clasped his hands together to return the salute. After thanking them, he walked to Kaisai Hikaryuni's side and knelt down. Kaisai Hikaryuni stretched out his hand and stroked his head. After that, Sayonji Tsunekatsu jumped up and strode into the field without looking back. He shouted at Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, do you still remember me? Do you dare to fight with me again?" Before Li Yundong had time to speak, the cultivators of the various sects next to him all shouted, "Shameless, taking turns to fight. Do you dare to be more shameless? Why don't you swarm up together?" Little Japan is little Japan. Their means are despicable and endless. Jinren, don't be provoked by him. At this time, Ziyuan also said to Li Yundong in a loud voice, "Jinren, let me fight in this game." However, Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Sayonji Tsunekatsu. With his intelligence and reaction, how could he not know what the other party was planning? He thought to himself, "This time, I have offended so many Japanese cultivation sections. In the future they will find trouble with me. Although I am not afraid, the people around me will inevitably be implicated. If I want these Japanese to not dare to retaliate in the future, I must beat them until they are convinced. In the future, when they mention my name, they will tremble all over and their legs will tremble." Thinking of this, Li Yundong snorted coldly and said in a loud voice, "Sayonji Tsunekatsu, a defeated opponent, dares to be so arrogant? Come here, let me see what progress you have made." Someone asked me if I would update on the 3rd. Of course not. These days I will try my best to ensure that the updates are normal, but I will make up for the missing updates when I come back. There will be updates in the evening. Chapter 711. Ever since Sayonji Tsunekatsu had been defeated by Li Yundong with one palm, he had learned from the pain. His originally flamboyant and violent temperament had also become much calmer. Although he had been enlightened by the Mandala 5 tribes of Kaisai Hikari and his cultivation had improved greatly, he did not dare to be careless when facing Li Yundong again. 9078. 8C34685078678X0U30. 9C7098 Sayonji Tsunekatsu deliberately provoked Li Yundong with arrogant words, but he didn't expect that Li Yundong would really accept the challenge. He had prepared a lot of words, but at this time he didn't need them. Under the ecstasy in his heart, he became calmer and calmer. Many cultivators on the sidelines shouted at Li Yundong, "Jinren, don't be provoked by this little Japanese. You have won 3 games in a row. Even Vajra Arhat can't stand it. Come down and take a rest before fighting." There were also cultivators who shouted at Sayonji Tsunekatsu, "King Japanese, you only know how to take advantage of this kind of advantage. What kind of ability is that? If you have the ability, let Jinren rest for 3 days. 3 days is not enough, at least 3 years. 3 years? In 3 years, Jinren has already cultivated to the golden immortal realm and ascended. I'm afraid that this little Japanese will never be able to take revenge for the rest of his life." Sayonji Tsunekatsu turned a deaf ear to these curses. He looked at Li Yundong and said in a deep voice, "Jinren, You attacked me in the previous battle. In this battle I must get justice. His words were righteous. Some people who didn't know the truth thought that Li Yundong had used disgraceful means to deal with him. For a moment, some cultivators on the sidelines looked at each other and cursed in a much lower voice. Li Yundong looked up and laughed. What a joke. It's really a thief crying to catch a thief. Sanji Tsunekatsu, I haven't seen you for a few days. I don't know if your kung fu has improved, but your eloquence has improved a lot. Do you want to compete with me in eloquence? Well, I'll accompany you. The two of them engaged in a battle of words and attacked each other. It seemed to be a harmless exchange of words, but every single word struck directly at the other's Tao heart. Once their wills wavered, their cultivations would be greatly reduced. But at this time, Li Yundong raised his voice and said, Sanji Tsunekatsu, if you are afraid, I will stand still and let you hit me 3 times first. How about that? Li Yundong's words caused another uproar outside the arena. Everyone looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They were not fools. Naturally, they could see Li Yundong's current situation. Not to mention letting Sanji Tsunekatsu hit him 3 times, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. 3 times? Even a Vajra made of iron or a Luohan made of copper would be smashed into pieces. However, Li Yundong had won 3 games in a row, and his momentum was so strong that no one dared to underestimate him. They all looked at Li Yundong in surprise and doubt, speculating about the truth of his words. Was he bluffing and deliberately mystifying, or was he trying to lure the enemy and repeat the same trick? Li Yundong had asked Takahashi Shota to cut himself 3 times, but Takahashi Shota had been shocked to death. Now Li Yundong had asked Sanji Tsunekatsu to hit himself 3 times. What would the result be? Would he be shocked to death as well? Did Li Yundong still have strength left? Everyone was talking and guessing. Sanji Tsunekatsu also looked at Li Yundong with a vigilant face. His eyes stared at Li Yundong like a hawk and a wolf, as if to see through his false reality. However, there was always a faint smile on Li Yundong's face and his eyes were bright. He was as steady as a mountain and as deep as water. The wind didn't move him and the waves didn't stir him. There was no clue at all. Could it be that this Li Yundong really has strength left? Or is this just a psychological war? What if he really has strength left? Such a thought involuntarily emerged in Sanji Tsunekatsu's heart. As soon as this thought came up, it took root like a devil, lingering and unable to be dispelled. But after all, he was one of the best of the younger generation of Xinyan Tantrism. After being defeated by Li Yundong, although there was some shadow in his heart, his character became more and more firm. He took a deep breath, calmed down, and forced the distracting thoughts out of his mind. Seeing that he couldn't get any advantage from talking, he stopped arguing with Li Yundong. He said in a deep voice, Jinren Li, I won't take advantage of you if I can't kill you with words. Let's have a fair competition. Many cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world on the sidelines booed when they heard this. How shameless you are. Sanji Tsunekatsu was like a clay doll with no self and no living beings. He didn't seem to hear what was going on around him. However, Li Yundong smiled and said, well, bring it on. Sanji Tsunekatsu saw that Li Yundong was no longer forcing him to fight 3 times first. His heart suddenly moved and he thought, Li Yundong must be an arrow at the end of its flight. He is bluffing. His eyes suddenly lit up and he was secretly happy. Just as he was about to step forward and attack, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, like the angry eyes of Vajra. His eyes spewed out 2 sharp eyes like lightning, shooting at him like sharp arrows. Before, Li Yundong's momentum was really light like a gentle breeze, but at this time, it suddenly turned into a storm, thunder and lightning. Especially this stare, the contrast was so great that it really had the terrible momentum of Guangong doesn't open his eyes, but when he opens his eyes, he wants to kill. Sanji Tsunekatsu was shocked and shouted in his heart, he still has strength left. He was really luring the enemy just now. This devil, how could he still have strength left? The cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world were also tongue-tied, looking at Li Yundong as if they were looking at a devil. Se Chuyun, who had previously asserted that Li Yundong was an arrow at the end of its flight, was also stunned. His cherry mouth opened into a shape, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. Everyone saw that Li Yundong didn't move much, but his body flew out like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Sanji Tsunekatsu. His momentum was fierce and explosive, and he moved like a bow, like thunder. Li Yundong's figure instantly rushed in front of Sanji Tsunekatsu. His body was like a bow, his 5 fingers opened, and like a devil's claw, he hit Sanji Tsunekatsu's face with both hands. When Li Yundong had not yet reached the Juji phase, He had often fought hand-to-hand with others, especially when he had just started cultivating. At this time he was fighting hand-to-hand with his opponent with the cultivation of the Jinshin phase. The strength of his power was really shocking. His 5 fingers were as strong as iron claws, and the strength of each finger penetrated through the fingertip. With one claw, even the steel plate would be scratched 5 holes, let alone the flesh. Saionji Tsunekatsu didn't expect Li Yundong to have such power. He was shocked and quickly retreated to avoid the edge. But as soon as he retreated, Li Yundong's feet were fast, step by step. He immediately turned his wrist, and the back of his hand was like a steel whip, slamming towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's throat. Saionji Tsunekatsu was also a fighting master, proficient in all kinds of ancient Japanese martial arts. He saw that Li Yundong was already close to him and began to fight hand-to-hand. His momentum was fierce, and it really should be the saying in the Fist Sutra, the good fighter has a short momentum and his momentum is fast. Saionji Tsunekatsu also knew that he could not keep retreating like this. Otherwise, once the other party's momentum soared, he would definitely lose. He gritted his teeth, immediately raised his hand, and hit Li Yundong's raised armpit with a knife in his hand. But at this time, Li Yundong seemed to have expected him to do this. He immediately raised his other hand and put it on his arm. As soon as their arms touched, both of them trembled at the same time. Li Yundong's wrist suddenly turned, and his 5 fingers were like hooks. He grabbed Saionji Tsunekatsu's wrist and pulled his arm down in front of him, not letting him move again. Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately raised his other hand and hit Li Yundong's face with a whip elbow. At this time, Li Yundong raised his hand again and touched his arm. In the same way, his 5 fingers grabbed the opponent's elbow and pulled the opponent's hand down again. He pulled the opponent's hands down and put them on his chest. At this time both of them were holding hands. It seemed to be a tie, but many people in the Japanese cultivation world exclaimed, "Not good. Changxing, be careful." Although Li Yundong was holding the opponent's hand with both hands, because Saionji Tsunekatsu's hands were crossed in front of him, one hand was pressed under the other hand. At this time, Li Yundong instantly released his hand that was pressed under the pressure, raised his hand and hit Saionji Tsunekatsu's head with his elbow. These 3 consecutive attacks were as fast as thunder and interlocked. The Japanese with discerning eyes immediately exclaimed, "Yama's 3 points. Baji fist." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were on the sidelines, looked at the field nervously and blankly. They heard many Japanese people shouting, "Baji, Baji?" They couldn't help but be curious. Deng Yu asked, "Shiji Lufeng, what are these Japanese shouting? What is Baji?" Zhang Lufeng stared at the field intently for fear of missing a movement. She explained without turning her head, "It's the 8 extremities fist of Tai Chi brings peace to the world in literature, 8 extremities fist of martial arts." Deng Yu asked curiously, "Is Baji fist very powerful? Do these Japanese also know about it?" Zhang Lufeng said quickly, "Whether it's the Japanese cultivation world or the Japanese martial arts world, they all recognize Baji fist as the most powerful fist technique in the martial arts world of China. In the Republic of China, Li Shuwen, the Baji Grandmaster, had 3 disciples. The eldest disciple, Huodienga, served as the martial arts instructor and guard officer of the last emperor, Puyi. He didn't leave until the puppet Manchukuo. His last disciple, Lu Yunxiao, served as the instructor and guard officer of Chiang Kai-shek's bodyguards. So, you know the power of Baji fist, don't you?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao exclaimed in unison and looked at Li Yundong with widened eyes. Li Yundong's whip elbow blasted towards Saionji Tsunekatsu. Saionji Tsunekatsu's hands were pressed down by one of Li Yundong's hands. It was too late for him to dodge or defend. He could only condense all his jinchi on his forehead. He lowered his head and hit Li Yundong's elbow with an iron head skill. With a bang sound, the 2 bodies collided, but the sound of metal and stone was heard. Their bodies suddenly shook, and they were shaken by their respective forces and took a step back. Although the forehead was the hardest bone of the human body, and Saionji Tsunekatsu had also practiced hard outer kung fu, the head was the most vulnerable part of the human body. When he collided with Li Yundong, there was a sudden dizziness in his brain, as if there was water flowing and shaking, and his ears were buzzing. He was about to retreat in shock, but he suddenly saw a strange and enchanting blush flash across Li Yundong's face, but Li Yundong quickly took a deep breath, and his face quickly returned to normal. Saionji Tsunekatsu was stunned, but soon his heart moved. He found that Li Yundong was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. At this time he must have forced his strength to launch such a fierce blow. In ecstasy, Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately dispelled the idea of retreating, and stepped toward Li Yundong. He bowed his knees, his 5 fingers slightly bent like a palm, like a fist but not a palm. It was the killing skill of Kyokushin Karate, Overlord Fist. But as soon as he punched out, Li Yundong immediately put his hand on his. After blocking his punch, he immediately stepped forward, raised his right hand high, and hit his opponent's chest with his elbow. Then the back of his hand, like a steel whip, hit Saionji Tsunekatsu's face. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. He saw that Li Yundong's punch was even fiercer than the previous Yama's 3 points. He was shocked and angry. He couldn't help roaring with grief and indignation. This bastard lied to me again. He didn't dare to take the move and retreated again. Li Yundong was unforgiving. He made 2 moves, one after another. Although his whip hand was dodged by his opponent, after the whip hand hit nothing, he immediately turned his wrist, and his 5 fingers were like tiger claws, clawing toward his opponent's face. It was the ultimate killing skill of the 8th Supreme Grandmaster, Divine Spear Li Shuwen, who was invincible in the world. Tiger climbing the mountain. Well, thank you for pointing it out. Some of the mistakes in the book have been corrected. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Chapter 7:12. The unique skill of Bajiquan, Fierce Tiger Climbing the Mountain, was not only powerful and fierce, but also had many changes, especially this move, which was overbearing and arrogant. No matter how the opponent dealt with it, it only cared about hard. When Li Yundong's claw came, there was a sudden exclamation from the sidelines. Zhou Qin and the others only saw that their blood was boiling and their eyes were shining. She had once fought hand-to-hand with a master of Bajiquan and relied on an extremely brutal and tough fighting method to win. Zhou Qin was young and vigorous, and she had become famous in the world with this battle. It was not that she didn't have the idea that Bajiquan is only SOSO. But at this time, when she saw Li Yundong's Bajiquan, it was really as fierce as a tiger, as powerful as a dragon, and unstoppable. She thought to herself, if Master had been on the field at that time, I was afraid that this move would have knocked me down. There would have been no chance for me to fight desperately. Su Chan clenched her fists and stared at the field nervously. She whispered, hurry up. 1 hit and the opponent will collapse, just 1 more hit. She saw that Li Yundong was like a maggot attached to a bone, staring at Saionji Tsunekatsu and constantly fighting close to him, but Saionji Tsunekatsu was always able to avoid the fatal blow at the most critical time. She couldn't help but be so anxious that she wished she could go up and catch Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was like a loach. Ziyuan stared at the field, and her expression became more and more serious. After watching for a while, she suddenly whispered, oh no. Li Yundong can't hold on. Zhou Qin turned her face in surprise and said, isn't Master suppressing the opponent? Why can't he hold on? Ziyuan clenched her fists and said nervously, an arrow at the end of its flight can't wear silk. This is also why Li Yundong can still suppress Saionji Tsunekatsu after 3 consecutive battles. If it were another person, they would have long been short of breath, deficient in qi and blood, and their bodies would have collapsed. While she was talking, Li Yundong's offensive on the field had indeed slowed down. Although Saionji Tsunekatsu had been chased by Li Yundong like a storm and his body had been hit in many places by Li Yundong, he had been a master of the Jinshin phase before he was defeated by Li Yundong for the first time. After that, he had been enlightened by Kaisai Hikaryuni and his power had greatly increased. How could he be defeated so easily? At this time he saw that Li Yundong's offensive had slowed down again, but he had learned from his mistakes. He didn't attack rashly anymore, but tentatively launched a counterattack against Li Yundong. With this counterattack, Li Yundong seemed to be unable to hold on and immediately retreated. Saionji Tsunekatsu was overjoyed and once again tentatively pressed forward. Li Yundong retreated again. At this time, even the cultivators on the sidelines could see that Li Yundong was on the verge of exhaustion. Many people in the Chinese cultivation world looked at the field with sighs and said, alas, Jinrenli can't do it. I'm afraid he's going to lose this game. Sigh, Li Wudi isn't invincible after all. How can anyone win so many battles in a row without losing? Yeah, look at his opponents. 3 golden bodies and 1 lightning tribulation. It's terrible. Jinrenli shouldn't have been in the limelight. He should have let someone else do it. Someone else? Who else can do it? Who dares to say that they can win against Saionji Tsunekatsu? The cultivators on the sidelines whispered to each other, but the situation on the field suddenly changed again. After Saionji Tsunekatsu chased after Li Yundong and attacked him several times, he found that Li Yundong really didn't have any strength left to attack again. His breathing was also extremely fierce, especially his face was purple and red, and his forehead was densely covered with sweat. Saionji Tsunekatsu no longer had any doubts and immediately rushed forward to attack wildly. Everyone saw his 2 arms waving a few shadows, as if a few arms had grown out of thin air on his shoulders, pressing down on Li Yundong and attacking wildly. Su Chan was so shocked that her face changed dramatically. She was about to exclaim, but she saw that Li Yundong didn't retreat but went forward. He turned a blind eye to Saionji Tsunekatsu's fierce attack. With a spin of his feet, he once again got close to Saionji Tsunekatsu. His body leaned toward Saionji Tsunekatsu, his shoulders were fixed and he backhanded. It was one of the 8 unique skills of Bejiquan. Overlord breaks the reins. At this time, everyone on the field thought that Li Yundong's defeat was certain, but Li Yundong was seeking life and death, seeking victory in defeat, and once again making waves in an impossible place. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. Just as he wanted to retreat, Li Yundong slapped him in the chest with his backhand, causing him to roar wildly. There was a sweet taste in his throat, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Saionji Tsunekatsu also punched Li Yundong in the shoulder. There was a cracking sound in Li Yundong's shoulder, and one of his arms hung down softly. Li Yundong didn't even snort. Instead, his eyes became sharper and fiercer. He couldn't rush forward, and his other hand was like a tiger's claw, digging towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's chest. Saionji Tsunekatsu was so shocked that he didn't dare to fight with Li Yundong again. He retreated like crazy and Li Yundong had already stuck to him. His feet were like a shadow, and his remaining arm was like a storm, pounding towards Saionji Tsunekatsu's chest. Everyone only heard a puff-puff sound as if a boxer with both hands was hitting a sandbag. The sound was so close and fast that no one could tell that it was the sound of an arm blasting out. Everyone was frightened and thought, Li Yundong's one arm is so fierce. If it were 2 arms, I'm afraid that Saionji Tsunekatsu would have been turned into meat paste, right? At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu could no longer get rid of Li Yundong. He struggled to support himself and retreated. Just as he was about to retreat to the side of the field, he suddenly saw a figure standing on the edge of the field. His heart moved and he immediately flew toward the figure. At this time, Li Yundong had almost used up his last breath. If this breath could not kill the opponent, then he would be killed by Saionji Tsunekatsu. He immediately chased after him like a shadow, turned his body, and turned his hand to slap towards Saionji Tsunekatsu. But as soon as he slapped out, he saw Saionji Tsunekatsu's body suddenly spin and push Lu Chunping, who had been standing on the side of the field, in front of him. After Lu Chunping was saved by Li Yundong, he had been standing on the side of the field like a wooden stake. At this time his qi and blood were in disorder, and he needed to rest quietly. He could not move easily, so the cultivators on the side of the field did not care about him. Even in the previous battle with Imagawa Kagumo, the flying thunder and lightning had fortunately not hit his head. But at this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that he could not stand it anymore, so he took him as a hostage and pushed him to Li Yundong's palm. At this time, the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world on the side of the field were shocked with anger. Although they hated Lu Chunping very much, if Lu Chunping died here, there would be a terrible earthquake in the cultivation world. Saionji Tsunekatsu's killing with a borrowed knife was insidious, shameless, and despicable to the extreme. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others cried out in horror at the same time. The cultivators of other sects also shouted angrily, shameless. Li Yundong didn't expect Saionji Tsunekatsu to be so despicable. Although he wanted to continue to slap the guy in front of him and Saionji Tsunekatsu into meat paste together. But Li Yundong's reason told him that he could not slap down. If he did, he would immediately cause a great disaster and from then on he would have to wander in Jianghu. It was not terrible for him to wander around, but did Su Chan want to live such a life with him? Didn't he promise her that he would make her happy? Even if she was willing, what about Ziyuan? What about Zhou Qin? What about the other people of the Fox Zen school? Would they be implicated by him? At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through Li Yundong's mind. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and forcefully retracted the palm that was going to kill him. The force that he had sent out was retracted, which was no different from being hit by the other party. But at this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu was extremely hidden and sinister. From under the armpit of Lu Chunping, who was standing like a wooden stake, he fiercely stabbed Li Yundong in the chest. Saionji Tsunekatsu became a monk at the age of 6. At the age of 8, he was selected as a monk to guard the temple. At the age of 10 he began to travel around the world to cultivate hard. By the age of 20, he had become the youngest and most promising guardian of the temple in Jinyan Tantrism. After so many years of cultivation, His whole body had been polished to be as hard as steel. If he hadn't met Li Yundong, a big pervert, he wouldn't have been beaten so badly. At this time he suddenly counterattacked. He really had the courage to succeed or die. In addition, his palm went out from under Lu Chuanping's armpit. It was hidden and sinister, and even ghosts and gods couldn't defend against it. And Li Yundong was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and he abruptly took back the palm he had sent out. Under this situation, even if he was a god, he wouldn't be able to escape this. Everyone only heard a puff sound. Li Yundong's chest was stabbed by Saionji Tsunekatsu with a hand knife, as deep as his palm. Saionji Tsunekatsu was ecstatic. He was about to give Li Yundong another fatal blow, but just as he wanted to pull out his palm, he saw Li Yundong's eyes staring at him. His eyes were red like a wild beast, and one hand grabbed his wrist to prevent him from pulling it out. At this time he flew up and kicked toward his temple. Saionji Tsunekatsu tilted his body and wanted to dodge, but he found that Li Yundong's foot was just a feint. He grabbed his hand and pulled it back. A huge force pulled his feet, and his body involuntarily rushed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, which pierced Saionji Tsunekatsu's chest from the side of Lu Chuanping's neck like a sharp arrow. Then he slapped Saionji Tsunekatsu's forehead with his palm. Saionji Tsunekatsu had never expected that Li Yundong would be able to fight back in such a situation, and the power was even more fierce than before. He felt a pain in his chest and he roared angrily at Li Yundong's blood arrow. He subconsciously reached out to cover his chest. Seeing Li Yundong's palm coming at him, he wanted to dodge, but he found that the qi and blood in his body were in a mess. The blood arrow that Li Yundong had spat out had hit his huagai acupoint. The qi in his body was in a mess and he couldn't move. There was a flash of despair in Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes. He watched helplessly as Li Yundong's palm came closer and closer and slapped toward his forehead. With a puff sound, Li Yundong's palm abruptly passed Lu Chunping and hit Saionji Tsunekatsu's forehead. Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe that Li Yundong could kill him in such a situation. Saionji Tsunekatsu's whole body shook, and a stream of blood burst out of his body. All the blood in his body exploded, and he slowly fell to the ground. At this time, Li Yundong's chest also had a big hole and blood was flowing out. His body shook a few times and it seemed that he was about to fall to the ground, but after he staggered he stabilized his body. At a glance he saw that Saionji Tsunekatsu had been killed by his palm. He smiled and glanced at the side of the field. He saw that at this time, everyone on the field was looking at him with their mouths open. The little girl had already burst into tears and rushed toward him crazily. Behind her was a nervous Ziyuan and an angry and anxious Zhou Qin. "Yundong, are you okay?" Su Chan ignored the eyes around her and rushed to Li Yundong like crazy. She wanted to see the wound on Li Yundong's chest. She sobbed and said, "Don't scare me. You can't have anything happen to you." Li Yundong forced a smile and gently wiped the tears on Su Chan's cheek with his bloody fingers. He smiled gently and said, "Don't be silly, I'm fine." But before he could finish his words, his eyes suddenly went black and he finally fell down on his back. All the cultivators on the side of the field exclaimed at the same time. They all stared at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open. This invincible Jinshin of Li Yundong, whose momentum was like a rainbow and whose figure was like a dragon, had finally broken. This man who seemed to never be knocked down had finally fallen. Chapter 713. Seeing this scene, Su Chan was so shocked that she almost fainted. Ziyuan, who was beside her, immediately grabbed Li Yundong's arm and skillfully reconnected his dislocated arm with both hands. Then she poured her Jinchi into Li Yundong's body without hesitation. 9078. 8C346H5078678X0U30. 9C7098. At this time, the cultivators of Jingyi School, Chuanjin Dragon Sect and other sects all gathered around. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects abandoned their sects and looked at Li Yundong, whose chest was bleeding with concern and anxiety. Zhang Kongyun quickly took out a jade bottle from his sleeve and handed it to Ziyuan. He said in a deep voice, "Ziyuan, hurry up and stop the bleeding." Ziyuan reached out and took it without looking at it. She pulled out the stopper of the bottle and poured it toward Li Yundong's chest. The elixir, which was worth 1,000 gold per gram, was immediately diluted by the blood. At this time, Ziyuan was worried and confused, as if she had lost her usual calmness. She hurriedly covered the wound on Li Yundong's chest with her hands, trying to suppress the blood from flowing out. However, Li Yundong's chest had been pierced by Saionji Tsunekatsu's palm. The wound was as big as a crocodile's mouth, so how could it be covered by her hands? Ziyuan covered Li Yundong's chest with both hands, but blood kept gushing out of her chest. She used her fingers to point at Li Yundong's acupoints to help him stop the bleeding, but Li Yundong had been too exhausted before, and his qi and blood had already been boiling like a volcano. At this time the injury on his chest was serious, and the chaotic qi and blood in his body had a place to go. They kept flowing out. How could acupuncture points stop the bleeding? Seeing that she couldn't stop the bleeding, Ziyuan's face suddenly turned pale, her hands trembled slightly, and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. At this time, Mao Yuchang of the Maoshan sect also squeezed in front of her. She didn't care about comparing with Ziyuan. She took out a purple gold jade bottle from her arms and said anxiously, "Try this. This is the jade-breaking rejuvenation ointment of our Maoshan sect." Ziyuan took it without saying a word and poured it into Li Yundong's wound without any hesitation. But as soon as she poured it, the blood still couldn't stop flowing. At this time, everyone was in a panic. Ziyuan, who was usually calm, was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Zhou Qin's eyes were red, and she glared fiercely at the cultivators of various sects in Japan. She made up her mind that if anything happened to Li Yundong, she would rush over and fight with them. Anyway, if Li Yundong died, she wouldn't live either. At this time, the little girl suddenly quieted down. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and said in a low voice, "Yundong, you won't leave me alone, will you? If you leave, she will be all alone and pitiful. If someone bullies her in the future, who will take care of her? Do you have the heart to do that?" As she spoke, the little girl's tears fell. Her tears dripped on Li Yundong's palm, like warm spring water moistening the cracked earth, making Li Yundong, who was in a coma, vaguely feel that someone on the distant shore seemed to be calling him. Li Yundong only felt that he was trapped in a dark and chaotic world. He could vaguely hear the voices of the people around him, but they were all talking at once and he couldn't hear them clearly. But at this time, Li Yundong suddenly heard a clear and magnetic middle-aged man's voice coming from a very distant place. "Li Yundong, where did your qi go? Where did your oneness of heaven and man and void in action go?" This voice was like a bolt of lightning cutting through the sky in the darkness, suddenly illuminating Li Yundong's mind. His heart skipped a beat, and he tried to control his scattered yang spirit Jinshin again, slowly summoning them back from all directions. During this process, Li Yundong faintly felt that he seemed to have entered an indescribable realm. It seemed that he had become one with the surrounding world. The vitality and spiritual qi condensed on every flower, grass, tree, and wood in Mount Longhu resonated with him. The surrounding aura, which contained the essence of heaven and earth, slowly flowed into his body. As soon as Li Yundong tried it, the qi and blood in his body immediately became under control. It no longer ran around wildly, and the flowing blood immediately slowed down. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were so anxious that they were crying, immediately became overjoyed and shouted, Okay, quickly apply the medicine." It stopped. Ziyuan looked and saw that the blood flowing from Li Yundong's wound had slowed down a lot. She was overjoyed and immediately poured the rest of the medicine in the bottle over. At this time, Li Yundong's chest had become like paste, so sticky that Ziyuan didn't care about the dirt. She applied the powder evenly on Li Yundong's chest with both hands. After her hands were covered in blood, Ziyuan saw that Li Yundong's wound was finally no longer bleeding. She breathed a sigh of relief, her whole body almost as if it had lost all its strength. When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Li Yundong's blood had stopped flowing, they couldn't help cheering. It's okay. His internal organs weren't hurt, and the bleeding has stopped." At this time, Li Yundong also slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the girl's pretty face, which was covered in tears. Li Yundong forced a smile, raised his hand to wipe away her tears and said with a smile, "Fool, how could I leave you behind?" Su Chan smiled, but tears rolled down her cheeks. She held Li Yundong's hand tightly with both hands and pressed it against her cheek. It seemed that as soon as she let go, Li Yundong would disappear. She wanted to say something, but as soon as she opened her mouth, her throat was so choked with sobs that she couldn't say anything. Li Yundong smiled and helped her stroke the hair on her temples. His gaze turned to Ziyuan, only to see that this fairy-like figure was looking at him with a smile on her face, and there were tears in her eyes. Li Yundong smiled at her and said softly, "Sorry to trouble you." Ziyuan shook her head quickly, but turned her face to the side and secretly wiped away her tears. Li Yundong finally looked at Zhou Qin and smiled. "You didn't want to do something stupid just now, did you?" Zhou Qin's eyes turned red and she almost cried. She said, "Master, if anything happens to you, I will kill all these Japanese people to avenge you." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't be silly. If anything happens to you, who will inherit my legacy? Who will pass on my story to future generations?" When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but cry. She thought about the scene when she had just met Li Yundong. From his fierce battle with the gangsters at school, to his limelight on the stage, to his battle with Lin Youfa at the school gate, to his lightning strike He Shao, to his fame at the Taoist assembly, to his defeat of Masako Tachibana on Mount Koya, and to his fight against the 3 Jinshin and 1 Thunder Tribulation on Mount Longhu, which shocked the Japanese cultivation world. Zhang Sanfeng, Wang Chongyang, Qin Pu, Bai Chan, and Zhang Buduan were all famous cultivators in history. Their deeds had been passed down for thousands of years, and they were still being told by people today. However, the once young boy in front of her had walked step by step. At this time he had grown into an indomitable great cultivator. Who would remember the story he had experienced in the future, and how would it be recorded? For a moment, Zhou Qin couldn't help thinking about it. At this time, the people of the Japanese cultivation world couldn't help falling into a depressing silence. Although the cultivators of various sects saw Li Yundong fall to the ground, they were not happy at all. They knew that although Li Yundong was seriously injured and fell to the ground, he had almost completely destroyed the morale of the Japanese cultivation world. He made them realize one thing. In the future, as long as this person was in China, they would always be shrouded in the shadow of this man, and they would never be able to rise again. For the extremely proud and conceited Japanese cultivators, how could they tolerate it? Even Abe, who had always opposed coming to China, said in a sad and heavy voice at this time, "What should we do now? Our failure has created a legend. This legend will be passed down in the world forever, and we will always be the supporting characters and footnotes of that tragedy and shame." As soon as he finished speaking, the cultivator named Otsuka of Deshang sect shouted angrily, "No, we must kill Li Yundong. Otherwise we will bear this shame forever." Abe was furious and scolded, "Kill him? Then you'll have to bear the infamy of 1,000 years. Otsuka roared loudly, "I'd rather bear this infamy alone than let such a great enemy live in the world." He knelt on the ground with a plop, his back straight, his eyes sweeping across the people present sharply, and he shouted sternly, "I've made up my mind. I've decided to challenge him again. If I'm unfortunate enough to die in battle, I hope that someone will stand up for me. Everyone, we are insignificant and our reputation is insignificant. But the reputation of the Japanese cultivation world must not be ruined in our hands. Everyone, this is a national war and we can't afford to lose." As he said this, he bent down heavily, then raised his head with a resolute face. He strode onto the field and shouted in a very stiff Chinese language, "Li Yundong, are you still alive? If you're not dead, do you dare to fight again?" His words made all the cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world fly into a rage. Even an experienced and prudent cultivator like Su Yangzi couldn't help but fly into a rage. He shouted angrily, "You Japanese are too shameless. How can you say such words? There's no need for Jinrenli to deal with people like you. Come on, let's have a few moves." Zhang Kongyun, Zhang Ling, Du Fei, Wei Qing, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao and the others were even more furious. They shouted and cursed loudly. For a time there was a lot of noise and curses on the field. However, Big Mound's expression did not change, as if he could not hear the crowd's tide-like curses. His eyes were like a wolf and an eagle, staring at Li Yundong as if he was staring at his prey. How could Li Yundong not know what the other party was planning? He smiled slightly, but before he could speak, Ziyuan beside him couldn't help grabbing his arm. Li Yundong turned his head and saw that the beautiful woman was biting her lip hard, her eyebrows full of pleading. She shook her head gently at him as if she was begging him not to go on the field again. Zhou Qin was also shocked and said in a trembling voice, "Master, this is their provocation. Don't fall for it." Li Yundong smiled and turned to look at Su Chan, only to see that the little girl's tears were rolling down her face. She was just looking at him and didn't say a word. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask with a smile, "Girl, why didn't you persuade me?" Su Chan wiped her tears with the back of her hand, forced a smile and said in a choked voice, "Yundong, I know what you're thinking. You want to get rid of them once and for all, don't you? You're afraid that we will be implicated in the future, aren't you? If you want to go, go ahead. Anyway, you know that I will always be behind you. No matter what you do, I won't stop you. It was like this in the past, it's like this now, and it will still be like this in the future." Although there was a hole in Li Yundong's chest and he had lost a lot of blood, his heart was warm. He looked at Su Chan gently and reached out to gently caress her face. He looked at her as if there was no one else around and said softly, "Girl, you know me best. He chuckled and said to Su-chan softly, "Help me up." She hastily wiped away the tears on her face and quickly wiped them on her clothes. Then she gently helped Li Yundong to his feet. At this time the onlookers were all shocked. They looked at Li Yundong in disbelief as if they couldn't believe their eyes. This guy who almost died just now actually wants to go on the field? Is he crazy? Zhang Kongyun couldn't help but persuade him, "Junrenli, there are still cultivators from other sects who can go on the field. Don't force yourself." Mao Yuchang, who was sharp-tongued, also tried to persuade him, "Junrenli, don't try to be brave anymore. If you go on the field again you will die." However, Li Yundong smiled and said softly, "The other party challenged me by name. How can I avoid the battle?" As he said this he slowly walked to the field. He looked up and down at the grave with a sarcastic smile on his face and said softly, "Hey, a mere young spirit master wants to take advantage of us? Come on, bring it on." Although Li Yundong's words were soft, everyone heard them clearly. For a moment the field was extremely quiet. The cultivators of all sects in the Japanese cultivation world also looked at Li Yundong with solemn expressions. Their gazes were extremely complicated, with shock, surprise, and a hint of deep awe. Big Mizuka looked at Li Yundong standing in the field. His handsome face was pale and he was holding his chest with one hand. His body was a little shaky as if he could be pushed down with a finger. However, he felt that this man who was about to fall at any time, was as majestic as a mountain, standing in front of him like a towering mountain whose peak could not be seen. Big Mizuka was shocked and thought to himself, "This man is seriously injured to such an extent, but he still has such power. If he survives this, the Japanese cultivation world will really be unable to raise our heads in front of him in the future. Such a terrible enemy must not be allowed to live in this world." Big Mizuka's heart shook, and he let out a beast-like roar. He held a long spear in his hand and slammed the end of the spear heavily on the ground. With a crisp sound, two sharp forks immediately popped out of the tip of the spear. It was the king of spear techniques in Japanese ancient martial arts, treasure yard style cross spear. Chapter 7:14. Otsuka held the spear with both hands. The tip of the spear was extremely long, about 30 centimeters long. There were blades protruding from the left and right sides of the spear in the shape of a cross, so this spear was also called a cross spear. The spear was about 2.4 meters long, and the tip of the spear was so sharp that it seemed to pierce through the air. In particular, the body of the spear was covered with exquisite talisman patterns, which were obviously imprinted with some kind of powerful magic circle. Otsuka stared at Li Yundong and said stiffly, "Junrenli, my spear was once used by Sanada Yukimura as a personal weapon. It has killed countless people and drunk their blood. Today you will be one of the souls killed by this spear." Li Yundong had been seriously injured before and had lost too much blood. His face looked as pale as paper and his feet were weak. Only his eyes were still bright, but they had lost a lot of spirit. He smiled slightly and said, "It turns out to be Sanada Yukimura's personal weapon. You have to be careful not to end up like him." While the two of them were talking on the field, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao asked in a low voice, "Who is Sanada Yukimura?" Zhang Lufang had explained a lot of things to them before, so she didn't mind explaining it again. She said in a low voice, "Sanada Yukimura was a famous samurai in the late Warring States period of Japan. He once fought his way into Tokugawa Ieyasu's formation with a cross spear in his hand during the Battle of Osaka. He fought so hard that Tokugawa Ieyasu almost committed suicide. Although Sanada Yukimura died in the battle due to his lack of physical strength, Tokugawa Ieyasu had to praise him as the strongest soldier in Japan after he narrowly escaped death." Deng Yu looked at Otsuka's spear curiously and then looked at Li Yundong worriedly. "The weapon of the strongest soldier in Japan must be very powerful, right?" Zhang Lufang said nervously in a low voice, "I don't know, but if Li Yundong hadn't been injured, I believe that such a person wouldn't be in his eyes at all, but now." As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong worriedly and couldn't bear to say the rest of her words. At this time, Otsuka held a long spear in his hand and shouted loudly. He quickly rushed toward Li Yundong. His body was extremely low, and the tip of the spear was pointing down at Li Yundong's lower abdomen. He rushed over with a fierce gust of wind. Everyone saw that the steel spear in Otsuka's hand was emitting bursts of light, and the spear seemed to have turned into a fierce dragon. It was aggressive and powerful. It was the secret skill of the cross spear of the treasury yard. This move was fierce and could instantly kill birds in the sky. In his eyes, the spear of Otsuka was so fierce that it could kill a bird. In his view, Otsuka of the spear of the spear. However, after he stabbed the spear at Li Yundong's lower abdomen, he saw that Li Yundong was still covering his chest with one hand, and the fingers of the other hand were spread out. His fingers accurately leaned against the side of the tip of the spear, and then with a gentle flick, the fierce spear, which was like a tornado, was pushed away. The founder of the treasury yard was Inrong, the head of the treasury of the Xingfu Temple of the Dharma characteristic sect in Japan. Inrong loved martial arts and was recognized as one of the 2 martial monks with the highest level of martial arts in Japanese history. His cultivation had reached the peak of Dharma seal. The founder of the treasury yard was Inrong, the head of the treasury yard of the Xingfu Temple of the Dharma characteristic sect in Japan. Inrong loved martial arts and was recognized as one of the 2 martial monks with the highest level of martial arts in Japanese history. His cultivation had reached the peak of the Dharma seal realm. He had once created the cross spear by observing the bright moon in the pond. The most famous part of this spear technique was its incantation: stab into a spear, slash into a razor, and cut into a hook and sickle. Ordinary people would usually be able to defend against the first thrust of the spear, but after that, the spear wielder would only need to drag the spear back slightly, and the cross-shaped body of the spear would be able to easily cut the opponent. Moreover, this move of turning the wrist and retracting the spear was extremely fast, like a flash of lightning, and even ghosts and gods would be able to guard against it. But no matter how fast the wrist and the spear were, it could not be faster than the speed of a finger. Li Yundong didn't even look at it. It was as if there were eyes all over his body. He accurately flicked his finger under the spear, and with a clang, the spear was once again deflected. Big Mound was shocked again. In a rage, he stabbed the spear in his hand and attacked Li Yundong from all directions like a storm. Everyone saw that his spear was as fast as lightning. It stabbed, hooked, curled, cut, lifted, cut, chopped, and slashed. Every move was fierce and sharp, and the spear was almost like a shadow. But Li Yundong still stood in the same place. One hand was covering the wound on his chest, and the other hand was gently raised in front of him. He didn't even raise his arm. He just kept moving his 5 fingers. Looking from afar, everyone felt that Li Yundong's movements did not seem to be fast, but he was able to easily deflect the opponent's attack with each move. Sometimes, it even seemed as if De Jong had stretched out the least lethal part of the spear to Li Yundong's fingers for him to flick. Big Mound was shocked and angry at the same time. He couldn't help but let out a roar, and the spear in his hand danced wildly. His whole body and the spear became a black shadow. The air was filled with the sound of his spear tearing through the air. It was shocking, like a ghost dancing in the air. However, Li Yundong remained motionless. One of his hands was placed in front of his chest, and his 5 fingers were impenetrable. No matter how fierce De Mound's attacks were, he was like a small boat floating in the raging waves, never capsizing. The onlookers were dazzled and their mouths were wide open. They couldn't believe that this man who was standing tall was actually seriously injured. At this time, Li Yundong was anxious when he saw that Big Mound's attacks were not successful. Although his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer, his strength was also getting harder and harder. He aimed at the moment when Big Mound's spear was about to stab him. He suddenly flicked the spear with his finger. With a clang, the spear shook violently. Big Mound felt a huge force coming at him, and the spear almost fell out of his hand. Shocked, he immediately tightened his grip on the spear and the force bounced back. But at this moment, Li Yundong flicked the tip of the spear again. The 2 opposing forces collided, and with a clang, the tip of the spear broke into 2 pieces. Big Mound's expression changed and he was stunned. However, at this moment, his hand was empty, and the cross-shaped spear was easily caught by Li Yundong. Li Yundong held the spear with one hand, and looked at the broken spear with a smile. He said softly, "Although the spear is good, it reeks of blood. It's not auspicious. I think it's better not to leave such an inauspicious thing in this world." As he spoke, he exerted a little force with his 2 fingers and slowly broke the body of the spear like cutting a branch. Finally, he folded the spear into a bare iron rod and threw it toward Big Mound. Big Mound subconsciously caught the spear. He looked at the bare iron rod in his hand in a daze, unable to speak for a long time. After a long time, he screamed, bent the iron rod with both hands and threw it into the distance. His face was blue and red as he ran out of the arena. The cultivators on the sidelines were all silent for a moment. Everyone looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in their eyes. They couldn't imagine how a cultivator who had been seriously injured could still have such power. At this time, most of the Japanese cultivators had been shocked by Li Yundong. Even those who wanted to fight couldn't help but start to retreat. Of course, as Big Mound had said, this battle could be called a national war, and they couldn't afford to lose. But at this time, they had risked the world's condemnation to challenge a seriously injured opponent. If they won, it would be fine. But if they lost, they would really be unable to raise their heads for the rest of their lives. After Big Mound was defeated, he couldn't restrain his shame and left in a hurry. For a moment, the cultivators of all the sects in Japan felt sorry for each other. They looked at each other and didn't want to fight again. Seeing this scene, I.C. Xinguang couldn't help but let out a long sigh and said with emotion, "He's really a god. To have such a person as an opponent is both a great fortune and a great misfortune for our generation." I.C. Izumo's eyes were filled with amazement. She had never seen a man as brave as Li Yundong. She said in a low voice, "It's a pity that I can't have a fair fight with him. This will be my lifelong regret." I.C. Xinguang reacted keenly. He looked at I.C. Chuyun in surprise and asked, "Are you going to fight?" I.C. Chuyun nodded slowly. She stared at Li Yundong and said in a low voice, "We can't let such an opponent live in this world. He's too terrible." I.C. Xinguang nodded gently and said, "Even a lion needs to go all out to fight a rabbit. Chuyun, go and end all this." I.C. Chuyun nodded slightly. She gently moved her feet and slowly walked into the field. She said softly, "I'm I.C. Chuyun from the I.C. Shinto. I want to see Li Jun's kung fu." As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Qin suddenly shouted angrily, "You guys are so shameless. Even if you win in this way, what's there to show off? What's there to be proud of? It's glorious." At this time the Chinese cultivators also shouted loudly, "That's right. There are so many of you. If you fight one by one, how long will it take? If you have the ability, come and fight with me. Why are you always staring at Jinren? I.C. Chuyun glanced at the side of the field. Her expression was cold, but her eyes were extremely bright and sharp. She said in a clear voice, "Li Jun, I promise you that I will be the last challenger. If you defeat me, we will immediately turn around and leave. In the future, as long as you are in China, we will never set foot in China again. What do you think?" At this time, Li Yundong's chest was injured, and he could barely muster any strength in his body. Earlier, he had used his 5 fingers to defend against De Mound's repeated attacks, and he had relied on his kung fu to overcome De Mound's strength with ease. However, when he had snatched the spear, his movements had been a little too forceful, and it had immediately caused a sharp pain in his chest. His throat felt salty as if he was about to vomit blood. Li Yundong swallowed the blood back, but his throat was so dry that he couldn't speak for a while. He looked at Ai Chuyun in front of him, and a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. This Ai Chuyun is probably the strongest cultivator in this group of people. She actually appeared at this time and used such words to provoke me, making it impossible for me to avoid. It seems that I'm going to die this time. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard the magnetic voice of a middle-aged man coming from afar. Li Yundong, these Japanese Ayase Shinto goddesses seem to be powerful, but in fact they are strong in appearance and weak in reality. They are easy to deal with. Don't be afraid of her. This was the second time Li Yunyang had heard this voice. He turned his head in surprise and looked around, but he didn't find anything unusual. He was surprised and doubtful in his heart. Who is the person who sent me the voice transmission? Chapter 7:15. This mysterious voice was not only very magnetic, but also very soft and pleasant to listen to. It was full of intellectual gentleness, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Li Yundong suddenly heard the mysterious voice transmission and couldn't help looking around. But as soon as he glanced around, the middle-aged man's voice rang in his ears again. Although the witches of the Shintoism are powerful, they cultivate their nature, not their fate. Moreover, they are born with 5 leakage bodies and never repair them, let alone Juji phase. Therefore, although the Shikigami she summons and the powerful magical weapons she uses are powerful, once they fight, they can attack her body fiercely. They use such powerful magic with their 5 leakage bodies, and they are the biggest flaw. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. It's difficult for me to take a step now, let alone attack fiercely. I'm afraid that if I use my strength now, I will immediately bleed to death. But the person who had sent the voice transmission seemed to know what he was thinking and said, "Point at the Zigong, Yutong, Shanzhong and Huagai acupoints on your chest, and then point at the Ruzhong, Rugen, Chihu, Kufang, Chimen and Ryu acupoints. Then store qi in your lower dantian. When you circulate it, control the qi and blood of your whole body and don't go to the Ren and Du meridians. In this way you can ensure that when you attack your opponent fiercely later, you won't bleed for about a minute." Li Yundong was shocked. He knew that the acupoint control method that the other party had told him was very strange. Even someone like him who had read a lot of books had never seen it. He hesitated for a moment, but then he heard the voice say with a smile, "Why don't you believe me?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. It's so inconvenient to not know how to use voice transmission. Only others can talk to me privately, but I can't take the initiative to talk to others. Wait. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Voice transmission? I remember Ziyuan once said that voice transmission seems to be the unique secret skill of the Linggong sect. This person. Could it be Wang Yuanshan? As soon as this thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind, he was immediately shocked. Wang Yuanshan is not dead? Ziyuan. Does she know? Just as Li Yunyang was about to look at Ziyuan subconsciously, he saw that Isi Chuyun, who was not far away, had taken out a white flag from her wide sleeve. She waved the white flag softly and muttered something in a low voice, as if she was chanting something. Her feet were light and strange, as if she was carrying out some mysterious sacrificial activity. He calmed himself down and temporarily put his worries aside. His fingers quickly pressed several acupoints on his chest according to the instructions given to him by the mysterious man. As soon as he pressed on the wound, he immediately felt a numbness in his chest. He couldn't feel any pain from the wound at all. Most importantly, when he circulated his qi a little, he felt as if all the qi in his body had bypassed the area around the wound, forming a vacuum zone where qi and blood didn't circulate. Li Yundong knew that once a Jinshin master's chest or waist was broken by the opponent, it meant that his Jinshin was broken. Not only would he no longer have a strong Jinshin protection, but it would also be extremely difficult for him to circulate his qi and blood normally. The reason why the Jinshin was so strong was that cultivators could constantly compress their aura in their bodies through their leakless body. The stronger a cultivator's body was, the stronger his cauldron would be. The greater the pressure in the sealed cauldron, the stronger the power of the Jinshin would be and the more condensed it would be. However, once a cultivator's body was injured, it meant that the cultivator was no longer a leakless body. Once they tried to compress and condense this Jinqi, it would automatically leak out from the wound. Therefore, the power of Jinshin could not condense and take shape. But at this time, after Li Yundong pressed these acupoints on his chest, it was as if an isolation zone had been created near his wound. His qi and blood didn't pass through this place. Li Yundong was surprised, and he could clearly feel that his Jinqi and strength were slowly recovering in his body. As for Isi Chuyun, she was still waving the white flag in her hand and didn't notice the change in Li Yundong at all. After she gracefully danced for a while, she suddenly raised the white banner in her hand into the air and shouted a few times. Immediately after, the sky seemed to split open, and a dazzling seven-colored divine light suddenly fell from it. This light shone straight on Isi Chuyun's body. Suddenly, her clothes fluttered without any wind, and her long black hair, which was like a waterfall, flew up. Her eyes shot out two sharp rays of light that were as dazzling as light, and there was no longer any color in her originally dark pupils. When the cultivators of the various sects of the Japanese Shintoism saw Isi Chuyun's majestic aura, they all looked in awe. Some of them even knelt down to worship Isi Chuyun. Deng Yu, who was standing to one side, felt strange and asked in a low voice, "What are they worshipping? Is this Japanese girl very powerful?" Zhang Kongyun said in a deep voice with a serious face, "They're not worshipping this girl, but Amaterasu, the highest god of the Japanese Shintoism." While they were talking, they saw a beautiful woman with a yellow belt on her forehead slowly descending from the sky. She was wearing a long yellow robe and a blue belt around her waist, holding a golden long sword in her hand. The woman's body was shining like the sun, and she stood high behind Isi Chuyun. At this time, Isi Chuyun's face was no longer as cold and elegant as before. At this time, the blue veins on her temples were bulging, and her neck seemed to be crawling with small cyan snakes. The qi and blood in her body were boiling to the extreme. She pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "The sun rises in the east and the divine light shines." Isi Chuyun's voice was like the shouts of millions of believers at the same time, echoing in the valley of Mount Longhu. Amaterasu, who was standing behind Isi Chuyun, was even more dazzling. The people outside the field were hurt by the dazzling light, and those who were slightly weaker even shed tears and didn't dare to look anymore. Li Yunyang had once fought with Yu Sheng, who had strong eyesight, and had seen his eyes as dazzling as the sun. However, Yu Sheng's ability was far inferior to Isi Chuyun's. With Yu Sheng's strength, an ordinary person could be scared to death by his glare. At this time, Isi Chuyun was 100 times more powerful than him. Li Yundong's eyes narrowed into a line in an instant. Even with his cultivation, he didn't dare to look directly at this dazzling light. He knew that Amaterasu was the sun goddess of the Japanese Shintoism. Her godhood was extremely high and her magic was extremely powerful. Moreover, Amaterasu was standing behind Ise Chuyun. If he suddenly attacked at this time, he was afraid that Amaterasu would split him in two with one sword, let alone attack Ise Chuyun's body. Li Yundong thought to himself, I have to lure Amaterasu away as soon as possible. Otherwise I will never be able to get close to Ise Chuyun. If I can't even get close, how can I attack? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and his mind raced. He quickly retreated as if he was going to escape. Si Chuyun raised her head and laughed. At this time she was already a demigod, and her personality had changed greatly. She pointed at Li Yundong from afar and shouted sternly, the sun is shining at the ends of the earth. Where can you run to? As soon as she finished speaking, Amaterasu behind her disappeared in an instant and slashed at Li Yundong with her sword. As soon as Amaterasu's sword fell, there was a terrible sound in the air, as if a piece of cloth had been torn apart. The air in front of Li Yundong was severely distorted, and an invisible black hole seemed to have been cut open by this sword. If he was slightly touched by it, he would immediately be sucked into it. Li Yundong's hair stood on end. At this time he retreated rapidly, but it was no longer a pretense. He ran as far as he could like a bolt of lightning. Amaterasu's sword missed and she was immediately furious. She raised her hand and slashed again. This sword with a loud bang shook the mountains, cracked the earth and cracked the rocks. Its power was extremely terrifying. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was being beaten back step by step, and there was no room for him to fight back at all. Ise Chuyun's strength showed an astonishing, overwhelming advantage on the field. Su Chan, who was on the sidelines, didn't dare to watch anymore. She put her palms together, closed her eyes, and began to recite the Buddhist scriptures in a low voice. The poor little girl's voice trembled. At this time she had completely forgotten the scriptures she had memorized. She just kept chanting the words, Amitban, in a low voice. Zhou Qin was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She wished she could rush up and replace Li Yundong. Ziyuan, on the other hand, stared at the field. Although there was no expression on her face, her mind was quickly thinking about the countermeasures in front of her, trying to think of a way to solve this dilemma for Li Yundong. But even though she was usually resourceful, her mind was empty at this time and she had no idea at all. When the cultivators of the Japanese sect saw that Ise Chuyun was suppressing Li Yundong and beating him up, they didn't look happy at all. It was as if they had already expected this scene. In their opinion, Ise Chuyun was a rare genius in the Japanese cultivation world. If she couldn't win against a seriously injured Li Yundong with all her might, then the sun would rise from the west. The Japanese cultivation world was very quiet, and the Chinese cultivation world was even more mournful. At this time, everyone could see that there was no chance for Li Yunyang to make a comeback in this battle. Ise Chuyun's advantage was too great, and he didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating his opponent. There was no chance at all. But just as the Chinese cultivators looked up to the sky and sighed, Li Yundong had unknowingly led Amaterasu to the side of the field, far away from Ise Chuyun. Just as Amaterasu's sword slashed down again, Li Yundong's jinchi suddenly poured out like a flood. This heat flowed through his limbs in an instant, and the power ran through his whole body. His head and tail trembled violently. Li Yundong stamped his feet and rushed toward Ise Chuyun like a cannonball. At this moment, Li Yundong's qi and blood suddenly surged and condensed into a ball. The power of his jinshin burst out, and he instantly got rid of Amaterasu in front of him. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to Ise Chuyun's face. He turned his hand and slapped Ise Chuyun's face with his palm. This time, everyone was dumbfounded and everyone cried out in surprise. Ise Chuyun hadn't expected Li Yundong to have such amazing strength. She felt as if she had seen a dead corpse suddenly come back to life, and her face changed dramatically. She quickly took out 3 talismans from her sleeve and threw them at Li Yundong. As soon as the 3 talismans left her hand, they immediately turned into 3 fierce shikigami and rushed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong quickly made 3 Mahamudra with both hands. It was the Vairocana Dharma boundary print, the lotus palm print, and the void hiding print. He shouted sternly, break, break, break. The 3 Mahamudra slammed into the 3 shikigami. Suddenly, there were 3 loud bangs that shook heaven and earth, and the 3 shikigami were instantly smashed into pieces. At this time, Li Yundong had almost used all his strength. He knew that his life or death depended on this blow. He didn't stop. He rushed to Ise Chuyun like a meteor and slapped her on the top of her head. Although Ise Chuyun was powerful, she cultivated nature instead of life. Her physical combat ability was almost zero, and her spiritual power was limited because she was a 5-leak body. She couldn't form a strong jinchi like Jinshin to protect her body. Therefore at this time she watched Li Yundong pounce on her with her mouth agape. There was no way for her to resist at all. She could only watch Li Yundong's palm get closer and closer to the top of her head, covering the sky and earth. Just as Li Yundong's palm was about to fall, Amaterasu instantly rushed behind Li Yundong and slashed at his back with his sword. At this moment, everyone on the sidelines almost suffocated. They all thought at the same time, is Li Yundong going to die together with Ise Chuyun in this desperate fight? Chapter 7:16. Just as Li Yundong's palm was about to hit Ise Chuyun, both Ise Chuyun himself and the cultivators of the various sects on the sidelines felt that time seemed to have stopped moving at this moment. They all stared at Li Yundong's palm slowly falling down with wide eyes. A few sharp lights suddenly flew out of the 7 treasure bag on Li Yundong's waist. It was the psychic fan of 7 treasures, the Bahuang sword, the Liuha sword, and the burning thumb pot. They jumped up at the same time and rushed toward the long sword in Amaterasu's hand. The pupils in Ayase Izumo's eyes narrowed instantly. At that moment she felt despair as she felt the approach of death and the ferocity of the Grim Reaper. She knew that as long as these treasures could stop the Amaterasu god for even a second, she would be dead. Izumo watched helplessly as Li Yundong's palm covered all the world in front of her and slammed toward her. But just when she thought that she was going to die, she suddenly saw Li Yundong's palm suddenly hovering less than a centimeter above her forehead, and it didn't go down anymore. At this moment, the long sword in Amaterasu's hand collided with the 4 powerful magical weapons. With a clang, the 4 powerful magical weapons were immediately knocked away, and the long sword in Amaterasu's hand was also shaken up. But just as she was about to continue slashing down, her movements suddenly stopped, as if her whole body had been petrified in an instant. Sichuyun stared at the palm above her head. Her arrogant face slowly became calm, and the amazing light and momentum around her gradually dissipated. The Amaterasu she had summoned also twisted and turned into countless dazzling rays of light that shot in all directions. Ise Chuyun also regained her original cold expression. She said lightly, "Why didn't you slap down?" Li Yundong stared at Ise Chuyun for a long time. Suddenly he smiled and said, "Do you know what the result will be if I slap down?" Izumo glanced at the palm on his forehead and said in an incongruous manner, "Your palm isn't that big either." Although Ayase Izumo's words were somewhat irrelevant, he was more or less unwilling to admit defeat, and there was a hint of stubbornness in his words. At this time, Li Yundong only felt that the sealed acupoints in his chest were becoming more and more swollen and stinging. He couldn't help coughing and chuckling, "Although the palm is not big, it's enough to cover the sky." Ayase Chumo's body shook slightly. She looked at Li Yunyang with a complicated look in her eyes for a long time before she let out a long breath. She slowly bowed and said respectfully, "I lost." Li Yundong smiled slightly, and the murderous intent in his eyes gradually dissipated. He nodded slowly and heavily. "Remember what you said before." After he finished speaking, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell backwards. The mountain-like man finally collapsed. A series of battles that concerned the cultivation world of China and Japan had finally come to an end with Ayase Izumi admitting defeat. There was a dead silence among the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world, but at this time, no one was clamoring to clear the name of the Japanese cultivation world and wash away their shame. The Japanese had one of the biggest characteristics. When they encountered a powerful enemy, they would often feel humiliated and angry, and then rise up to challenge them. They would charge forward without any regard for their own safety, and in the end they would even die together. However, once they found that the strong person they encountered was far beyond their imagination, their humiliation and anger would immediately turn into extreme fear and worship. In 663 AD, the Tang dynasty in Japan had a decisive battle at the mouth of the Baijiang River on the Korean peninsula. At that time, Lu Ringgui, a famous general of the Tang dynasty, led 7,000 Tang troops and more than 170 ships to fight against 40,000 Japanese troops and more than 1,000 warships, and finally wiped out the Japanese navy. After this battle, Emperor Tenji of Japan submitted to Emperor Gaozong of the Tang dynasty. For nearly 1,000 years, Japan had not dared to look directly at China. At this time, the shock that Li Yundong gave to the Japanese cultivation world was no less than that of the battle at the mouth of the Baijiang River more than 1,000 years ago. They could not imagine how such a young cultivator could be so strong and reach such a realm. Li Yundong in front of them had killed Takahashi Shota, defeated Abe Yuji, defeated Imagawa Kagumo, killed Saionji Tsunekatsu, defeated Otsuka, and finally reversed the situation of Ayase Izumi when he was seriously injured and waiting to die. This had simply exceeded their imagination and cognitive ability. At this time, what the cultivators of all sects in Japan felt was no longer humiliation and anger, but deep awe and worship. The Japanese people worshipped the strong, especially the tragic and strong. Although they were from different camps at this time, they were all full of inexplicable respect for the man in front of them who had fought continuously. Izumi was spat out a mouthful of blood by Li Yundong, and her cold face was stained with blood. Surprisingly, she did not frown and reach out to wipe it. She just looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes, and then looked at the few women who were crazily rushing toward him. She sighed softly, turned around and walked to the side of the field. Izumi walked up to Ayase Xingguang, bowed slightly and said softly, "I'm sorry to disappoint you." Ayase Xingguang put his hands in front of his chest and still looked a little careless, but his expression was full of emotion. He said in a low voice, "I originally thought that the leaders of the major cultivation sects in China would have a fierce confrontation with us. No matter what the result was, it would have been a fierce battle that could be recorded in history. But I didn't expect that the leaders of these Chinese sects would cherish their feathers too much. Among the 3,000 cultivators in China, only this person is a hero. We were originally going to fight against the mystical silver fox, but the battle actually made Li Yundong his invincible reputation. What a pity, respect and fear." He looked at Li Yundong, who was lying on the ground in awe, and said with emotion, "This person is the reincarnation of Wisdom King, and he is invincible in fighting. He really deserves to be called the Fighting Heavenly Lord. It's an honor for me to be defeated by him." After sighing with emotion, he turned to Ayase Xingguang and said, "Xingguang-jun, what should we do now?" Ayase Kenko glanced at Ayase Izumo helplessly. He seemed to be a little dissatisfied with how confident she was before, but he also knew that he couldn't blame Ayase Izumo. At that time, even he thought that Ayase Izumo would definitely win. But who knew that Li Yundong was like a ghost or a god? Under such circumstances he could still turn the tide. This made it impossible for him to blame him. Ayase Xingguang sighed softly and whispered to the depressed cultivators of the various sects, "Everyone, the facts are in front of us. This time we have completely lost." Before he could finish his words, someone straightened his neck, panted heavily and said painfully, "Xingguang-jun, are we going back like this?" Ayase Xingguang sighed and said, "I know what you are thinking, but we didn't lose to these ancient sects in the Chinese cultivation world. We lost to the immovable Wisdom King, his reincarnation Li Yundong." As soon as he said this, the cultivators of the other sects suddenly looked much better, but someone said in a low voice, "But, what about the mystical silver fox? Can it be that as long as Li Yundong is here, we will leave the mystical silver fox alone?" Ayase Xingguang was silent for a long time, and then he said slowly, "Everyone, I believe you all know that the mystical silver fox and the immovable Wisdom King are mortal enemies. If the mystical silver fox wants to take revenge, maybe she will choose a target that is easier to take revenge on, such as a seriously injured reincarnated Wisdom King. Even if the mystical silver fox doesn't find trouble with the reincarnated Wisdom King, we are not necessarily afraid of her. We could seal her up in the past and we can still do it now. As long as she comes again, we will definitely make her unable to return." Ayase Xingguang's words made the cultivators of all sects turn around in anger, and their faces were full of spirit. They all seemed to have found a way out of the stage and said, "Xingguang-jun, well said. That's right, that makes sense. Yes, we lost to the reincarnated Wisdom King, not to the Chinese cultivation world. They were in a mess." Suddenly, Hideyoshi of the Tiantai sect, who had been reciting scriptures on the sidelines, suddenly opened his eyes and stood up. He scolded sternly, "You timid guys, how dare you succumb to the despotic power of a boy?" His stern shout suddenly made the faces of the others change greatly. Abioli's face darkened and he said angrily, "Hideyoshi, what did you say? Have you ever seen a boy like Li Yundong? Even Imagawa Kagumo doesn't dare to say that he can defeat so many of us in a row." As soon as he said this, the other cultivators echoed loudly. Hideyoshi looked at them angrily. He gritted his teeth and picked up the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo. Finally, he glanced at them gloomily as if he wanted to remember them all in his eyes. He turned around and strode down the mountain. The other monks of the Tiantai sect also followed him down the mountain with their injured companions in their arms. Kaisai Hikaryuni of the Jinyin Tantrism, who had been silent all this time, sighed deeply. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha, "Amitabha, I've sinned. After that, he slowly turned around and walked down the mountain. The other cultivators of the Xinyan Tantrism left with him one after another. More than half of the cultivators of all sects had left. Compared with the mighty situation when they came, they were really lonely. Si Shenko, Abe Yuri, and the others looked at each other, sighed softly, and left one after another. At this time, Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others had already surrounded Li Yundong anxiously, especially Su Chan. When she saw Li Yundong fall again, she was shocked and rushed to Li Yundong in the blink of an eye. She saw that there was blood in front of Li Yundong, his eyes were closed, his lips were purple gold, and his expression was very frightening. She suddenly felt a pain in her heart and immediately squatted down to feel Li Yundong's pulse. But when she touched it, she immediately felt that there was no pulse in Li Yundong's body. This time, Su Chan was so shocked that she froze on the spot. Her body involuntarily trembled violently. Her lips trembled slightly, and her eyes stared straight at Li Yundong. Her eyes were empty, and her whole body seemed to have left her body. When Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, who had rushed over, saw Su Chan like this, their hearts sank. They hurriedly checked Li Yundong's pulse, and when they did, they were all stunned on the spot, tears streaming down their cheeks. Zhou Qin said in a trembling voice, "Master, don't scare me. I'll kill all these Japanese for you and avenge you." As soon as she moved, Ziyuan grabbed her. Zhou Qin suddenly turned her head and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Ziyuan, let go." Tears kept rolling in Ziyuan's eyes. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. Her expression was stubborn, and she looked at Zhou Qin's sharp eyes without showing any sign of weakness. The two of them confronted each other, but Su Chan was already crying like a pear blossom in the rain. She sobbed and said, "Yundong, you didn't keep your word. You said you wouldn't leave me behind. How could you?" Before she could finish her words, she suddenly heard Li Yundong's soft and helpless voice. "You guys are so noisy." Su Chan's crying stopped abruptly. She took a deep breath and opened her small mouth into an O shape. There were still tears on her face, and she stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. Her eyes were filled with unspeakable surprise, ecstasy, doubt, and confusion. Zhou Qin also stared at Li Yundong and said tentatively, "Master, you're not dead?" Ziyuan also involuntarily let go of Zhou Qin's hand and looked at Li Yundong with her mouth open and tongue tied. It was really a wonderful scene for a fairy like her to be so surprised. Li Yundong pressed the wound on his chest with one hand and said in a low voice, "Evil disciple, do you really want me to die? So that you can inherit my inheritance in the future?" At this moment, both Zhou Qin and Ziyuan wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to. Zhou Qin suppressed her surprise and laughter and said embarrassedly, "Master, I thought." Before she could finish her words, Li Yundong sighed and said, "What do you mean? Can't I sleep for a while? You guys are really noisy." As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, Su Chan suddenly cheered and threw herself on Li Yundong. She burst into tears and said, "Yundong, you scared me to death. I thought you were dead." As soon as she threw herself on him, the wound on Li Yundong's chest suddenly ruptured. He felt a sharp pain all over his body and his eyes darkened. The corners of his mouth twitched. He struggled and said, "Stop it. If you don't stop, I will really die." After saying this, his eyes darkened, his head tilted, and he fainted. At this time, there were still some Japanese cultivators who had not left. When they saw this scene, they felt very upset in their hearts. The newly born Heavenly Master Battler had not been knocked unconscious in a series of fierce battles, but at this time, Su Chan was so excited that he immediately fainted. It was really that even heroes had a weakness for a beautiful woman. Well, I came back from Beijing today. I was a little in a hurry, so I was late. Sorry, there will be another update later. Chapter 717. Su Chan saw that she had pounced on Li Yundong, causing his chest to bleed again. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. She was shocked and quickly stood up straight. She looked at Li Yundong in a daze, then tentatively poked his arm with her fingers and said in a trembling voice, Master, are you okay?" Zhou Qin and Ziyuan also looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They really hadn't recovered from the surprise, so extreme joy turned to sorrow. They checked Li Yundong again in a hurry. This time Ziyuan saw through it. She breathed a sigh of relief in her heart and couldn't help but smile. "It's okay. Just now Li Yundong didn't catch his breath and faked his death. But his cultivation is profound, and it only took a while for him to adjust himself. However, just now Su Chan. His wound ruptured, his breath became chaotic and he fainted again. Su Chan was also relieved, but her face was full of embarrassment and sadness. She lowered her head and her chin almost buried in her chest. She whispered, I didn't do it on purpose. I. The more she spoke, the more anxious she became and tears kept welling up in her eyes. Seeing that she was about to cry again, Ziyuan quickly smiled bitterly and said, Su-chan, it's normal for you to react like this. It's not your fault. With Li Yundong's cultivation, as long as his internal organs and tendons are not hurt, he will be fine. He will be fine after resting for a while. At this time, Zhou Qin was also relieved. She glanced around and saw that the Japanese cultivators were leaving one after another. She raised her eyebrows and snorted coldly. These Japanese still want to leave? It's not that easy. Before she caught up, Ziyuan, who was beside her, hurriedly advised, Zhou Qin, don't chase a cornered enemy. At this time it's better to avoid trouble. Previously Isi Chuyun made a vow that as long as he was defeated by Li Yundong, as long as Li Yundong was alive, they would never set foot on the mainland of China again. Don't force them into a corner. Otherwise a cornered dog will jump over the wall. How could Zhou Qin not know this? She was just angry that these Japanese people had swaggered over to fight with them and then left after failing. Although the Japanese cultivation world had paid a heavy price in the Battle of Mount Longhu, with 2 Jinshin and 1 Thunder Tribulation dead, in Zhou Qin's opinion, even a hair on Li Yundong's body was 100 times more precious than them, not to mention that he had been seriously injured by them and was now unconscious. Zhou Qin glared at the Japanese resentfully and snorted. They're lucky. I'll settle this score with them sooner or later. At this time, the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect had been messed up by this group of Japanese. The cultivation world of China and Japan had been in a mess, and each sect had suffered casualties. Zhang Ling and the others of the Jingyi school, who had originally wanted to make things difficult for the Linggong sect at the inauguration ceremony, didn't know what to do when they saw the situation. In particular, Zhang Tongtian, Zhang Huashui, and the others of the Qingqing sect had originally wanted to make things difficult for Li Yundong at the inauguration ceremony, but in turn they owed Li Yundong a favor. Although Zhang Huashui's eyes had been hurt by Takahashi Shota's spray before, he had listened in all directions and understood the situation on the field. At this time he gradually calmed down. He turned to Zhang Tongtian and said, Senior brother, what should we do now? Zhang Tongtian stared at the unconscious Li Yundong and sighed in a deep voice with a complicated look in his eyes. Shixiang, there must be something fishy about the night massacre of Qingqing Mountain. I don't think Li Yundong is a person who can do such a cruel thing. Although Zhang Huashui couldn't see Li Yundong's previous fighting methods with his naked eyes, his cultivation quotient and yang spirit were still there. He also knew how fierce and shocking Li Yundong's previous fierce battles were. Therefore, even a proud and hot-tempered man like him couldn't help but admire him. Zhang Huashui nodded. Shixiang, what you said makes sense. Let's investigate this matter again. However, I always feel that it must have something to do with the Fox Zen school. Maybe in the end, after investigating, I'm afraid it will still fall on this guy. Zhang Tongtian was silent. After a while he said, let's not worry about that for now. Although Li Wudi is powerful, our Qingqing sect is not useless. Let's go back. Zhang Huashui hesitated for a moment and asked, then, what about the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect? Zhang Tongtian snorted. Can you still do it in such a situation? Let's go. This matter must have been ruined now. There's no point in staying any longer. Zhang Huashui had always followed his senior brother's lead. He responded and followed his senior brother to Zhang Ling and the others. They greeted Zhang Ling and the others with their disciples and grand disciples, then went down the mountain noisily. As soon as they left, many people from the Maoshan sect, Chuanjin Dragon sect and other sects also left. Although Du Fei, Wei Qing, Yu Xing, Mao Yuchang and the others wanted to say a few words to Li Yundong, he was unconscious at this time, so it was not appropriate for them to go forward and talk to Su-chan, Ziyuan, and the others rashly. They could only look at them from afar and go down the mountain. After Zhang Ling said goodbye to these people one by one, she looked at Ziyuan helplessly. Her eyes flickered. After a long time she said in a deep voice, Jinren Ziyuan. Hearing her words, Ziyuan's heart trembled. She straightened up, bowed to her and said, the Jinren of the earthly fire, what can I do for you? Zhang Ling said, today's inauguration ceremony was supposed to punish you according to the rules of our Jingyi school, but so many things have happened, so the ceremony has been cancelled halfway. Although the ceremony was cancelled today, it doesn't mean that it will be abandoned forever. Our Jingyi school will choose another day to hold the inauguration ceremony. I hope that you won't be unable to take out the powerful magical weapon of the sect at that time. After that, she looked away from Ziyuan and cast her eyes on Li Yundong. She took a deep look at the man and then at Ao Wushuang with hatred. Finally, she turned her face with a complicated expression and whispered to Zhou Ping, "Let's go." Zhou Ping was stunned. "But master..." Zhang Ling tilted her head slightly and said unhappily, "Didn't you hear what I said?" Zhou Ping's heart tightened. She didn't dare to say anything more. She lowered her head and followed Zhang Ling away. As soon as Zhang Ling left, the people of the Jingyi school also left one after another. For a moment, the mountain was empty. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked back at Li Yundong with every step they took. They wanted to go forward and say a few words to Li Yundong. They didn't want to say too many words. They just wanted this man to know that they were not dead and that they were living a good life in Mount Longhu. But at this time, Li Yundong was unconscious. They wanted to go forward and care about him, but he was surrounded by Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin, and Ao Wushuang was standing next to him. The two of them were shy girls, so how could they have the nerve to get close to these stunning beauties? Some of them were Li Yundong's girlfriends, some were his confidants, and some were his disciples. Even the most distant ones were Li Yundong's fellow disciples or friends. But what about them? At this moment, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's thoughts were tangled. What am I? Am I just a poor little girl who looks at the hero in my heart from afar and has a crush on him? The sisters had the same thought. They sighed together, turned around, and left with Zhang Ling and the others. When Zhang Lufang saw them turn around and leave, she said something to Zhang Kongyun and quickly chased after them. But after taking a few steps, she suddenly found that there seemed to be someone missing from her side. She looked back and saw Hardadef standing there in a daze, motionless like a clay puppet. She quickly ran back to look at Hardadef and asked curiously, "Hardadef, what's wrong with you? Why are you in a daze here?" Hardadef pursed his lips tightly, clenched his fists, and trembled slightly. He turned his face and a strange light shone in his blue eyes. He said in a low voice, "I want to cultivate." Zhang Lufang was stunned. "What?" Hardadef then repeated in a firm voice, "I said, I want to cultivate." Zhang Lufang giggled. "What's the matter? Have you been touched by Invincible Li's prestige? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how far you can go. However, if you want to cultivate, you have to go to my master. What's the use of telling me?" Without saying a word, Hardadef rushed to Zhang Kongyun, knelt down with a thud, kowtowed heavily, and said resolutely, "Master, I want to cultivate." As he spoke, he raised his head and his eyes were warm and firm. There was no sign of his usual naivety. Zhang Kongyun was silent for a while. He raised his hand, helped him up, and patted him on the shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his eyes softened a lot. He turned around and waved his hand, motioning for him to follow behind him. Seeing him leave, Hardadef thought that he wouldn't agree, so he hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed again. However, Zhang Lufang gently kicked him and whispered, "Idiot, master promised you. Hurry up and keep up." As if waking up from a dream, Hardadef hurriedly followed. Just as Zhang Kongyun was about to leave the temple with Hardadef and Zhang Lufang, he suddenly heard Ao Wushuang shouting behind him, "Zhang Kongyun, tell me Wang Yuanshan. Is he still alive?" Zhang Kongyun stopped and said without looking back, "He died a long time ago." After that, he quickly walked away and gradually disappeared into the mountain path. Zhang Kongyun was silent all the way. After leaving the side peak with Zhang Lufang and the others, he suddenly turned to Zhang Lufang and said, "Take him back first. I'll go somewhere else." Zhang Lufang knew that her master had lost the battle today, so he must be in a bad mood. She nodded obediently and said with concern, "Master, come back soon." A smile appeared on Zhang Kongyun's old face and he nodded gently. After watching Zhang Kongyun and Hardadef leave, he walked to a side peak. After he walked up the mountain, he came to a huge rock on the top of the mountain with a Fengqin stone engraved on it. He stood quietly for a long time before he slowly said, "You taught Li Jiandong how to stop bleeding, didn't you? Only you know this kind of technique. Since you were locked up here 10 years ago, no one in the cultivation world has used this technique." As he spoke, a man suddenly appeared behind him. This man was wearing a Taoist robe. He was handsome and elegant like an immortal. At first glance, he looked like a man in his 30s, especially his eyes, which were deep and experienced, as if he had seen through everything in the world. He smiled gently and said, "So what if I did? So what if I didn't?" Zhang Kongyun was silent for a while, then said, "Your old lover is here. Don't you want to go down the mountain to see her?" The man lowered his eyes slightly. After a long time, he raised them and sighed softly. "It's better not to see her. Zhang Kongyun turned his head to look at him and chuckled. It's been 10 years but you still haven't forgotten her. You still hate us. Are you happy to see me suffer a crushing defeat this time? The man said in a low voice, a great disaster is coming. How can I have the time to watch you make a fool of yourself? Zhang Kongyun seemed to know what the great disaster he was talking about was. He suddenly asked, why didn't you take action? If you had taken action, the Jingyi school would not have suffered such humiliation. The man smiled slightly and said, whether it's the Jingyi school or the Zhenger school, what does it have to do with me? However, your leader, Jinren Zhang, was able to resist coming out of seclusion. I really admire him. He is indeed a good cultivator who is indifferent to fame and fortune. Zhang Kongyun stared at him closely. After a long time he said, the cultivation world is about to be in chaos. I want to see how long you can be free and unfettered. With that he snorted and left in a huff. The man's eyes revealed a hint of a smile as he looked at the man's back. He suddenly raised his voice and said, you are the ones who locked me up here and now you are saying such things. Could it be that you want to take all the good and bad people in this world as your own? Zhang Kongyun stopped and glared at him angrily. Then he quickened his pace and left quickly. The man looked at his figure and couldn't help laughing. But after laughing for a while, he suddenly looked in the direction of Ao Wushuang and said softly, Wushuang, I haven't seen you for 10 years. How are you? Chapter 7:18. The earth-shattering battle finally came to an end. There were few people on the mountain which had been crowded with people. Except for Lu Chunping who had been in a daze by the side of the Taoist sanctum, there were only Li Jiandong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang and the others left. Ao Wushuang looked in the direction where Zhang Kongyun had left. After a long time, Su Chan walked gently to her side and said in a low voice, Master, let's go back. Ao Wushuang turned her head. Her cold and strong face was full of heartbreaking sadness and unwillingness. She whispered, Chan'er, do you think Wang Yuanshan is dead? Su Chan had never seen her strong and resolute master show such a weak side. She couldn't bear it and gently persuaded, Master, I think Wang Yuanshan should still be alive. Although Ao Wushuang knew that Su Chan was comforting her, her eyes still lit up and she quickly asked, if he is alive, why didn't he come to me? Su Chan blinked and said, maybe he has his own difficulties? Ao Wushuang grabbed her arm and said anxiously, what difficulties does he have? Is there anything more important than me? Su Chan felt a pain in her arm. She couldn't help but cry out, Master, it hurts. Only then did Ao Wushuang wake up. She let go of her hand in disappointment and despair. She smiled sadly and said softly, I know you are comforting me. After so many years, he has never come to find me. If he is still here, he will definitely come to find me. If he doesn't come, then there can only be one result. I should have expected it, I should have stopped holding out hope. As she said this, 2 lines of tears slowly flowed down Ao Wushuang's cheeks. Not far away, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and were silent. In their impression, Ao Wushuang was a strong, indifferent, gorgeous and strong woman. But under her hard shell, there was a hot and weak heart. At this moment she was no different from a weak and helpless little girl. Su Chan gently wiped away Ao Wushuang's tears. She chuckled and said, Master, even if Wang Yuanshan has ascended, maybe one day you will also become an immortal. Won't you be able to see him again? Ao Wushuang stared at Su Chan with a gentle look in her eyes. Silly child, since the Tang dynasty, no fox spirit has become an immortal. Don't be silly. Even if Ao Wushuang reaches the realm of a 9-tailed celestial fox, she still can't become an immortal. Su Chan asked curiously, why not? Ao Wushuang gently stroked Su Chan's cheek and said softly, because the immortals in heaven don't accept us, and the people on earth don't accept us either. We are a group of monsters who don't care about heaven and earth. Su Chan was not convinced. No, Yundong will take care of me. I don't care whether others take care of me or not. Ao Wushuang chuckled and looked at Su Chan as if she had a lot to say, but when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she glanced at Li Yundong who was unconscious not far away and changed her mind. Forget it, let's go back first. Li Yundong's injury is more important. Su Chan nodded obediently, and the group turned and walked down the mountain. After a fierce battle, the dark clouds that had originally shrouded Mount Longhu disappeared. The blue sky was clear and boundless. Even from a distance, Su Chan and the others could see that there were many tourists on the main peak of Mount Longhu looking at them. They didn't dare to fly. After going down the mountain, they walked a long way before flying back to Tianan City with Li Yundong. As soon as he returned home, the little foxes, who had been waiting anxiously for news, swarmed around him, chattering and asking questions. Especially when they saw Li Yundong, who was unconscious, they suddenly turned pale with fright and surrounded him tightly. Fortunately, Su Chan put her hands on her hips and scolded them, which drove the little foxes away. Chris, who was next to her, also looked at the seriously injured Li Yundong in surprise. She wanted to ask something, but she didn't know how to say it, so she could only watch with concern. After Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others placed Li Yundong in his room, Ziyuan treated his wounds and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Ziyuan looked at Su Chan and then at Zhou Qin, and then said softly, "Su Chan, take care of Li Yundong. Zhou Qin, you have to be careful that the higher-ups will make trouble for you. This time the impact of the battle is very big and it's very bad. You have to be careful." Zhou Qin nodded. "Don't worry, I've already thought about what to do. It'll be fine." Ziyuan smiled slightly and said softly, "That's good. Li Yundong is really lucky to have a disciple like you." Zhou Qin looked at her with a complicated look in her eyes and said softly, "It's a real blessing for me to have a master like Li Yundong. Moreover, it's his fortune to have a confidant like you." Ziyuan's heart trembled slightly. She couldn't help but quickly glance at Su Chan, only to see that she was looking at the unconscious Li Yundong in a daze, as if she hadn't heard such a sentence. Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. She smiled, didn't answer and walked out of the door. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong quietly in the room for a while. After a long time, she sighed softly and also went out. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong quietly in the room, her eyes flashing. The little girl felt extremely guilty now. She couldn't help in the battle, but just now she had almost worsened Li Yundong's injury. This was too much. Even the little girl couldn't forgive herself. How could I be so stupid? Su Chan hit her head in annoyance. She looked at Li Yundong with a sad face and pouted her little mouth. She thought dejectedly in her heart, "Yundong must hate me. I almost killed him." Su Chan stared at Li Yundong's face with infatuation. Her eyes moved from his thick eyebrows to his tall nose, and then to the corners of his mouth. The girl couldn't help but be fascinated by him for a moment. She stared at his face for a while, then at the corners of his mouth. Since the first day she had decided to be with him, since she had decided to grow up with him, although the little girl had expected that he would become a very great cultivator and a great hero in the future, she had never expected that he would become a great cultivator and a great hero. But she really hadn't thought that Li Yundong could become so strong that he could almost destroy the entire Japanese cultivation world by himself and make the Japanese cultivation world have to abide by the promise that as long as Li Yundong was in China, they would not set foot in China. From now on, Invincible Li would be truly invincible. The cultivators of all sects would no longer have any doubts about Li Yundong's strength. In the future, wherever they went, they would point at Li Yundong from afar and say, "Look, this is Invincible Li. And what about her?" In the future, if she stayed by his side, they would point at her and say, "Look, that's the troublemaker around Li Yundong, just like, they look at my master. Wang Yuanshan and my master were forced to separate, so what about me? Will I be forced to separate from Li Yundong in the future? If I don't become stronger, will the tragedy that happened to my master and Wang Yuanshan repeat itself?" When she had seen Li Yundong fall twice on Mount Longhu, Su Chan had really felt a wave of fear and oppression from the depths of her soul. She couldn't imagine how she would survive without Li Yundong by her side in the future. "No, I can't let what happened to my master happen to me." Su Chan clenched her fists and her eyes showed a strong and firm look. She whispered, "You have to become stronger, Su Chan. You can't be a burden to Yundong." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a soft voice say, "Silly girl, do you finally want to work hard to become stronger?" Su Chan was shocked. She looked up and saw Li Yundong standing on the bed looking at her gently. The little girl was surprised and said, "Yundong, you're awake? How's your injury?" The little girl looked at Li Yundong's chest, only to see that it was intact as if there was no injury. She was tongue-tied and said, Your injury has healed? That's impossible, isn't it?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He pointed down and said, "Look down." The little girl looked down and saw that Li Yundong was still lying on the bed, his chest wrapped in gauze that was soaked with red blood. Su Chan was stunned. "Ah, to Yundong's?" But then she quickly reacted and said, "Oh, your yang spirit is out of your body." Li Yundong laughed and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched the tip of the little girl's nose. "You're not stupid." Su Chan pouted and lowered her head. She took Li Yundong's hand and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, I'm so stupid. I couldn't help you and I almost made your injury worse." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan lovingly and laughed. "Silly girl, you're just a little excited. Besides, people will grow up slowly, but you are very slow." At first, Su Chan was a little relieved, but when she heard the last sentence, her face suddenly fell. She said bitterly, "Well, I know I'm stupid. Don't hit me all the time or I'll really become stupid." Li Yundong saw that the little girl was full of self-pity and self-blame, so he laughed and said, "I'm just teasing you. You're the type of person who matures slowly, okay?" Su Chan wrinkled her little nose and made a face at Li Yundong. "You're so annoying. I don't want to be the type of person who matures slowly." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan with a smile and suddenly whispered to her, "Do you want to become a master immediately?" Su Chan nodded without hesitation. "Of course I can't help you with anything. I'm very sad." Li Yundong laughed wickedly, hugged Su Chan, and said with a smile, "Well, you also know that I'm a Jinshin master now. Do you remember what you said?" Su Chan looked up at Li Yundong and blinked. At first she didn't react, but soon she cried out. Her face was red, and she shyly buried her head in Li Yundong's chest and said angrily, "You're so annoying. You only remember this. You're so bad." Li Yundong said with a straight face, "The way of dual cultivation is a family, and the ceremony of husband and wife is a big ceremony. Haven't you heard of it?" Su Chan smiled and said, "Bah, what big ceremony? Is doing this kind of thing also a big ceremony?" Li Yundong said seriously, "You little girl, did all the books you studied before go to waste? Don't you know that this kind of thing is called a big ceremony?" Su Chan scratched her cheeks and giggled. "Shame on you. This is obviously a derivative meaning. How can you take it so seriously?" Li Yundong grabbed her wrist and said with a coquettish face, "Chaner, don't you want to do this big ceremony with me?" Su Chan's ears were so embarrassed that they almost bled. She chuckled and lowered her head. The corners of her eyes were flowing and she giggled and said, "I called you invincible, Li. If I see you like this, won't I laugh myself to death?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "When I fainted, I thought of you for a moment. I was thinking, if one day I'm gone, what will you do? If I die one day and don't have a day of warmth with my girl, then I will have lived my life in vain." Su Chan was shocked when she heard this. She quickly reached out and pressed her hand against Li Yundong's lips, saying nervously, "Don't talk nonsense. You can't say such things casually." Li Yundong gently picked up Su Chan's soft hand and kissed it. He said softly, "If I hadn't met you, I would have lived a muddle-headed life. But God let me meet you, so I won't let my life be in vain. 10,000 years is too long. I have to seize every moment, right?" Su Chan felt warm in her heart when she heard this. She gently stroked Li Yundong's lips and cheeks with her hand. The little girl's face was blushing. She whispered, "Yundong, Chaner is all yours. She also wants to be with you. It's just that your injury hasn't healed yet. When your injury is healed, we can't." "Okay." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan's shy appearance and laughed in his heart. Suddenly, he said in surprise, "Of course I have to wait until my injury is healed. There's a big hole in my body so I can't condense the power of Jinshin, so my yang spirit is only in the yang spirit realm. If I have sex with you, won't I be sucked to death by you?" As he said this, he shook his head and sighed. "I didn't expect you to be even more anxious than me." Su Chan was embarrassed. She stamped her feet and said angrily, "You're so annoying. You're messing with me." The two of them laughed for a while. Su Chan lay lazily in Li Yundong's arms. Although her face was full of happy smiles, Li Yundong was keenly aware of a trace of worry and melancholy hidden deep in Su Chan's eyes. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly smiled and said, Come with me, your yang spirit. I'll take you somewhere." Su Chan asked curiously, "Where are we going?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Let's go find Wang Yuanshan." Chapter 719. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong in surprise and said, "Yundong, why do you want to find Wang Yuanshan now? Isn't he already dead?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "No, he shouldn't be dead and he should be in Mount Longhu. I'll be there soon." Su Chan's eyes widened. "No way? Wang Yuanshan is not dead? How do you know?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Do you remember that I sealed the acupoints on my body to stop the wound? That was told to me by a voice transmission. Moreover, I remember that Ziyuan once said that only the cultivators of the Lingong sect are good at using voice transmission. Who do you think the person who sent me the voice transmission was?" Su Chan exclaimed, I have to tell master as soon as possible. Li Yundong quickly grabbed her and said, silly, let's go and have a look first. What if I'm wrong? Your master can't bear this kind of disappointment anymore. Su Chan nodded and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. Yundong, you are so thoughtful. Shall we go now? Li Yundong nodded and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. As she spoke, she looked at Li Yundong's body and said softly, now that your yang spirit is out of your body, will it affect the recovery of your injury? Li Yundong laughed and said, no, my qi and blood are running automatically in my body and recovering on their own. Ziyuan poured so many elixirs on my wound before. Do you think it was all for nothing? Li Yundong patted Su Chan's head and said softly, let's go to Mount Longhu to have a look. Su Chan rolled her eyes. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly felt a familiar aura quickly leaving the house and heading into the distance. Su Chan was very familiar with this aura. It was the aura of Ao Wushuang. Su Chan was stunned and then asked curiously, where is master going? Li Yundong was also stunned for a moment. The direction she's going seems to be Mount Longhu? Su Chan said in surprise, it must be that master is unwilling to give up, so she wants to go to Mount Longhu to have a look. She won't be in trouble, will she? Li Yunyang thought for a while and said, after the battle, although the Jingyi school did not lose many people, there will definitely be a period of relaxation. The defense should not be very strict. Moreover, with Ao Wushuang's strength she should be fine. However, we can't be too careless. We'll follow them to take a look, but don't let your physical body follow them. Otherwise, if something happens, it'll be inconvenient for you to escape. Su Chan giggled. You're the world-famous Li Wudi now. Will you be chased away by others? Li Yundong smiled and said, there is no such thing as absolute invincibility. My physical body is very weak now, and the power of my yang spirit has also decreased a lot. Besides, Mount Longhu is not a playground. I can go and leave as I please. If something happens, it will be hard to say. Su Chan nodded and said with a smile, my yang spirit is stronger than yours now. Maybe I'll have to protect you in the end. Li Yundong laughed and said, well, I'm looking forward to it. The two of them chatted and laughed, and the yang spirit quickly chased after Ao Wushuang. The two of them followed Ao Wushuang from afar for a while and saw that she was flying in the direction of Jiangxi. After waiting for a long time, the two of them saw that the mountains under their feet were continuous, with green mountains and blue waters. They were vast and winding, like a crouching dragon. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said with some emotion, I didn't expect to return to Mount Longhu so soon. Let's go down. Su Chan nodded. She looked around and felt that Ao Wushuang had landed on a side peak, so she stopped. She pulled Li Yundong's hand and whispered, Master is over there. Do you want to go and have a look? Li Yundong nodded and landed on the ground with Su Chan. The two of them looked over and saw that on the top of a side peak, Ao Wushuang was standing in front of a huge rock. Her back was to the two of them. Although her expression could not be seen, Li Yundong could tell from the way she gently stroked the rock that her heart must be full of sorrow at this time. Ao Wushuang stroked the rock and muttered to herself in a low voice, Yuan Shan, are you really still alive? If you were still alive, why didn't you come to see me? Do you know how much I've missed you in the past 10 years? Do you have the heart to watch me live alone in the world? At this time Ao Wushuang's voice was bitter and mellow, like a dreamer whispering her thoughts to her lover. In the distance, Li Yundong and Su Chan sighed in their hearts when they heard this. Su Chan's eyes were red and she couldn't help but want to cry. She unconsciously held Li Yundong tightly with both hands, as if she was afraid that he would run away in the next second. The two of them quietly listened to Ao Wushuang whisper to the huge rock about the little things she had done with Wang Yuanshan. They listened to her talk about her previous happiness, as well as the pain and sadness when she was lonely. For a moment the two of them seemed to be in a daze. Soon, Ao Wushuang spoke in a low voice. No one knew how long it had been, but her tears had already formed. Tears rolled down her beautiful face. She cried in a low voice for a long time before she let out a long sigh and said in a choked voice, Yuanshan, if you are still in this world, you must come to me. You must remember. As she said this, she suddenly raised her head and shouted, Wang Yuanshan, you must come to me. Ao Wushuang's shout shook the sky and echoed between the valleys of Mount Longhu. Li Yundong and Su Chan were so shocked that their faces turned a little pale. They looked at each other and Su Chan stammered, Master, is she crazy? Isn't she afraid of attracting the other people of the Jingyi school? Li Yundong also said with a solemn face, Oh no. Your master, she seems to have the will to die. Su Chan was startled. What do you mean? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, there are two purposes for your master to shout. First, if Wang Yuanshan is still here, he will definitely be able to hear this shout, and the other people of the Jingyi school will also be able to hear it. At this time, the other people of the Jingyi school will definitely come to make trouble for your master. If Wang Yuanshan doesn't show up at this time, your master will definitely think that he is indeed dead. If so, she will die with the others of the Jingyi school. If Wang Yuanshan is not dead, he should show up to save Ao Wushuang. Su Chan was shocked and hurriedly said, Yundong, hurry up and help my master. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Me? I'm at best a young spirit master now. I'm not as good as you in fighting. How can I help? Su Chan said anxiously, what should we do? Li Yundong patted her head and said softly, let's wait and see. Wang Yuanshan should show up. But what surprised Li Yundong and Su Chan was that after Ao Wushuang's shout, not only did Wang Yuanshan not show up, but none of the other people of the Jingyi school showed up. What's going on? Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other. Li Yundong was tongue-tied. Su Chan also asked curiously, why didn't anyone come? Li Yundong had a strange look on his face. I don't know. But it seems to be a good thing? Su Chan's face was full of joy. Anyway, as long as my master is fine. At this time, the two of them couldn't help looking at Ao Wushuang, only to see that Ao Wushuang's face, which was full of hope, slowly became lonely and sad, and finally lowered her head in despair. Ao Wushuang stood there in a daze, motionless as if she had been petrified. After a long time she slowly moved. Her footsteps were as heavy as lead. She walked down the mountain step by step until her figure disappeared into the jungle. She never looked back. Li Yundong sighed with emotion. Su Chan, who was beside him, seemed to empathize with him. Tears kept welling up in her eyes, and she snuggled up to Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. She whispered, Yundong, I'm so sad. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan show up? Li Yundong sighed softly and said, maybe, he is really not in this world anymore? Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm and pressed her face against his chest. She looked at the direction in which Ao Wushuang had left and said in a low voice, why didn't the people of Jingyi school come? Li Yundong also felt strange in his heart. He turned to look at the main peak of Jingyi school and shook his head. I don't know, but this matter is very strange. Su Chan suddenly looked up and asked, shall we go and see what's going on? Li Yundong thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, let's mix in the crowd of tourists and have a look. Don't cause any trouble. After the two of them came to an agreement, they quickly rushed toward the main peak. However, as they ran, they did not see a single Taoist priest. Especially when they arrived at the front of the Taoist rite on the main peak, they realized that there were only a few Taoist priests of higher seniority who were socializing around the scenic spots. The others were extremely young and of extremely low seniority. Li Yundong glanced around and felt a little strange. But suddenly, a Taoist priest rushed to a senior Taoist priest and whispered something in his ear. The Taoist priest's face changed greatly. He immediately winked at the Taoist priests around him and then walked down the mountain quietly. Li Yundong looked back and winked at Su Chan, and the two of them quickly followed. They saw these Taoist priests go down the mountain and get out of the sight of the secular people. They quickly flew toward a side peak. The two of them followed them from a distance. When they arrived at a side peak, they found that these Taoist priests had gone into a very hidden Taoist rite. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other and didn't dare to follow them in. Instead, they chose to choose a high place and looked at it from a high place. At a glance, they saw that the Taoist rite was very large, even larger than the one held by the Jingyi school for the succession ceremony of the Linggong sect. In the field, a group of Taoist priests in gray Taoist robes were confronting Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the others of the Jingyi school. There was a lot of noise on both sides and the atmosphere was tense. Su Chan said curiously, it's so strange. Are they having an internal strife? Li Yundong said curiously, could it be that they are having an internal strife right after the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect? That's impossible. No. Among these Taoist priests, why are there so many foreign devils? The two of them took a closer look and saw that many of the Taoist priests in gray robes had deep eyes, high noses, and golden blue eyes. Su Chan was dumbfounded. Which sect is this? Li Yundong also felt a little incredulous. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard the sound of music coming from the mountain road below, and there were people shouting in unison. But when they got closer, they understood that it was actually someone playing the suona, beating the alms bowl, and some people were shouting in unison, Sect leader Wu Hua, supernatural power is connected to the gods, in the heavens and on the earth, only I am supreme, When Li Yundong heard this, he almost fainted. He looked at the group of people in shock and said, "Damn it, no way. When did Jing Yuan become the constellation immortal? Did he watch too many demigods and semi-devils?" Su Chan heard these people shouting at the top of their lungs. Their voices were loud, but the content was a little funny. She wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. She could only hold back her laughter and said, "What the hell is this old guy doing?" The two of them widened their eyes as they looked at the group of people, only to see that they were dressed in all sorts of ways. The people at the front were playing and singing while the people at the back were holding banners and shouting loudly. Among them, a few strong men were carrying a wooden platform, on which sat a beautiful and charming woman. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw the woman. He stammered, "Damn it, this is Ding Nan. What the hell is going on? Did she take the wrong medicine?" Chapter 720. Li Yundong and Su Chan were shocked to see Ding Nan slowly going up the mountain surrounded by a group of people. Su Chan was tongue-tied and said, "How did Ding Nan become the leader of the Yin and Yang sect of 5 flowers?" Li Yundong also had a strange expression on his face. He murmured, "Could it be that Jing Yuan died after the battle at Tiandu Peak? That can't be. With his strength, he shouldn't have died just like that." Su Chan pointed at Ding Nan with a smile on her face. "But, from the looks of it, Ding Nan seems to be the leader now." At this time, the two of them looked carefully and saw Ding Nan sitting on a high wooden platform. The platform was square, well-made, exquisitely carved and brightly colored. Even from a distance, they could see at a glance that the side of the wooden platform was full of exquisite patterns. The platform was covered with soft silk mattress. Ding Nan was leaning against a goose-down cushion, and her face was covered with light makeup. She looked beautiful and arrogant. Ding Nan looked around condescendingly. Although her eyes were full of pride, there was also a trace of anger hidden deep in them. She looked up at the Taoist temple hidden in the jungle in the distance and shouted to a young man beside her with some displeasure, "Hurry up, hurry up!" The man shouted a few times at the people carrying the high platform, then turned his head. His face was quite handsome, but his eyebrows were full of flattery. He smiled and said, "Leader, this is already the fastest." Ding Nan raised her eyebrows and said angrily, "****, if you hadn't insisted on such a show, how could I have missed the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect? By the time I got there, everyone would have left. Now that there are so many people gathered here, how can I miss it again? Don't you want our Yin and Yang sect of Mount Wuhua to stand out? Don't you want to hold our heads up high?" As soon as she finished speaking, the disciples of Mount Wuhua behind her suddenly shouted hysterically, "Leader Wuhua, the spiritual power of the gods, I am the only one in the world." Their voices echoed in the valley, and even Ding Nan's heart was shaken and she was full of joy. The young and handsome man in front of her said with a smile, "Yes, yes. But sect leader, you also need to conserve your energy. Don't waste your energy just because you want to hurry, right?" Ding Nan said angrily, "***T. I've been sitting all the way here. How could I have wasted my energy? Besides, are you the one who has the final say or am I?" When the young man heard this, he couldn't help but turn his head to the other side. He kept winking at a slender woman with brown hair and blue eyes, as if asking for help. This woman was none other than Alba. Since the poor foreign girl witnessed Ding Nan killing her teacher, she had been forcibly detained by Ding Nan. Although she had wanted to escape for many days, how could she escape from Ding Nan's grasp? Ding Nan was born to be a scheming and resourceful woman. Especially since she had been with Zhou Qin for a long time, she had seen all kinds of conspiracies in the officialdom and the business world, and her experience had greatly increased. However, when she had been with Zhou Qin in the past, she had always been suppressed by Zhou Qin, and all her light had been obscured by Zhou Qin. Later, although she had left Zhou Qin, she had become more cautious around Jing Yuan, keeping a low profile and being humble. She was afraid that she would reveal her flaws and arouse Jing Yuan's suspicion, which would lead to her death. This kind of repression and humiliation had made Ding Nan's heart even more twisted, especially when she had suddenly killed Jing Yuan and become the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua. It was like a slave had suddenly become a master, and the poor had suddenly become a nouveau riche. Her mind had become strange and twisted. Although at first there were still some hardcore supporters of Jing Yuan in the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua who had questioned his death, Ding Nan had used the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing, and the immortal pen to eradicate her opponents. After that, no one in Mount Wuhua dared to make any strange noises. During this process, a young man named Song Guohua stood out. This young man did not have any extraordinary abilities among the 100 or so disciples of Mount Wuhua. However, he was a top-notch expert in bootlicking and flattering. In the past, when Jing Yuan was still alive, Jing Yuan did not like this kind of flattery, so he had no chance to stand out and did not teach him much magic cultivation. But now, Ding Nan had become the leader of the Yin Yang sect, and Ding Nan was a woman who was born vain and liked to be pursued by others. At this time, there was no one above her. At this time, this kind of vanity broke out several times or even dozens of times. Song Guohua keenly grasped this and quickly won Ding Nan's trust. After testing him for a period of time, Ding Nan gradually handed over many things around her to him to take care of and concentrated on her cultivation. After a series of failed attempts to escape, Alba gradually gave up and was full of awe for this devil-like master. She did not dare to have the slightest thought of resisting and began to accept her fate to cultivate with Ding Nan. Ding Nan did not know whether it was out of sympathy or for other reasons, but she used the method of slapping Alba and giving her a sweet date to tame this wild woman. After seeing that she was finally honest, Ding Nan slowly taught her some simple cultivation methods. The magic of cultivation was that it could not only make people obtain extraordinary power, but also give cultivators a great sense of satisfaction in the process of qi cultivation. After Alba came into contact with the way of cultivation, she was shocked by the magic and mystery of it. She immediately forgot the previous unhappiness and pain and immersed herself in the world of cultivation like a drug addict. After noticing Alba's thoughts, Ding Nan was also quite satisfied. She gradually relaxed her vigilance and control over Alba. Since the two of them had killed Jing Yuan together, Ding Nan subconsciously felt closer to Alba than to anyone else. Every time Song Guohua was scolded and beaten by Ding Nan, he would turn to Alba for help. During this period of time, Alba had learned a little Chinese. When she saw Song Guohua looking at her, she said in stiff Chinese, "Master, I don't think you can blame Song for this. He just..." Ding Nan glared at her fiercely and scolded, "You have no right to speak here. Shut up." Alba was frightened by her. She immediately shrank her head and shrugged helplessly at Song Guohua. Song Guohua smiled bitterly and had no choice but to turn his head to urge the disciples of Mount Wuhua who were carrying the wooden platform. For a moment, these strong men were sweating profusely, and their footsteps became a little faster. In the distance, Li Yunyang and Su Chan were shocked when they saw what they were doing. However, no matter how powerful they were, they would never have imagined that this was what Song Guohua had specially prepared to please Ding Nan. In particular, this sentence of leader of Mount Wuhua with supernatural power is the only one in the world. It was really flattery and disgusting to the extreme. At first, Ding Nan was very disgusted and had scolded Song Guohua sternly. However, Song Guohua was keenly aware that Ding Nan only frowned a little when she heard what he said, but she immediately relaxed. He knew that Ding Nan was just not used to it. Therefore, he mustered up his courage and cried out with tears streaming down his face, "Leader Shifu, this is the voice of all the disciples of Mount Wuhua. In the future, our Yin Yang sect of Mount Wuhua will be carried forward in your hands. This sentence comes from the bottom of our hearts. As the saying goes, flattery will never work." Although this flattery was very disgusting, if the disciples around her flattered her all day long and repeated the lie 10,000 times, it would become the truth. Slowly, Ding Nan started to feel disgusted and then adapted to it. Now, after listening to it a lot, she actually felt very satisfied, as if she had really become an invincible master in the world. Moreover, in her opinion, she had the Hel Wuzhang enchanting jade, the immortal pen, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing, and she had once absorbed the immortal qi of the Diuan Jindan. As long as she was willing to work hard, she might be able to become the best in the world in the future. At that time, even Zhou Qin would be trampled under her feet, and even the world-famous Li Wudi would not dare to look down on her. Therefore, with this idea in mind, Ding Nan set off from Mount Wuhua to Mount Longhu with her disciples as if they were on a parade. However, when they slowly arrived at the side peak of Mount Longhu, they found that the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect had already ended. Fortunately, Ding Nan soon keenly sensed the aura of many strong people appearing on a side peak in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat and she headed for this side peak. When she slowly climbed up this side peak and entered the Taoist temple, the Taoist priests of the two sects who had been confronting each other were all dumbfounded. They saw the disciples of the Yin Yang sect of Mount Wuhua playing their instruments and singing at the front and shouting slogans at the back. The disciples in the middle were even more exaggerated, each of them dressed up like a mighty god king. Even though there was a beautiful woman sitting at the top with a graceful figure, after a moment of silence, everyone burst into wild laughter at the same time. For a moment, the tense atmosphere on the field was gone. The people from both sides were pointing at Ding Nan and laughing, especially among the group of people in gray Taoist robes. A frivolous young man stepped forward and laughed loudly. "Hey beauty, what are you doing? Are you here to make a movie?" I'm dying of laughter. You call me the leader of Mount Wuhua? Your spiritual energy is divine, and you are the only one in the world. So funny. How dare you shout such words in front of us? Aren't you afraid of being humiliated in front of so many people? Ding Nan couldn't stand others looking down on her, especially when she was humiliated in front of so many people. Her heart was full of killing intent, but her face remained calm. She slowly touched her sleeve with one hand and touched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. As soon as her fingertips touched this extremely vicious powerful magical weapon, her heart immediately calmed down. A charming smile appeared on her face and she giggled. "Handsome, what's your name? Tell me so that I can get to know you." The handsome man saw Ding Nan's enchanting figure and outstanding appearance, especially her charming smile, which was really very attractive. He smiled proudly and said, "I'm a disciple of the overseas sect of Jingyi school. My name is Sun Qing. You can also call me by my Taoist name, Jinren Yuanfa, or by my English name, Louis." As he said this, he flipped his bangs coquettishly and looked at Ding Nan with a smile. Ding Nan's face was full of smiles, but the eyes in her eyes were getting colder and colder. She whispered Sun Cheng's name, and in an instant, a few ghosts rushed out of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade hidden in her sleeve. They cried and rushed to Sun Cheng in an instant. Sun Cheng was still proudly posing and showing off. He didn't expect that Ding Nan would use her ultimate skill in the blink of an eye. Trump card. Before he could react, he saw several ferocious-looking undead howl and drill into his body. Then they pulled his soul back at lightning speed. In an instant his own body was sucked dry like a mummy. His whole body was like a wooden stake and his face was still full of disbelief. He was motionless but he was already dead. Ding Nan's move was as fast as lightning. The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade was originally an extremely sinister and vicious powerful magical weapon. When Zheng Yuan used it, he used it openly but Ding Nan simply hid it. She even recited the other party's name almost silently. This was extremely hidden and sinister. Even immortals would find it difficult to guard against it, let alone Sun Qing, who was defenseless. For a moment, everyone was dumbfounded. They looked at the beautiful and enchanting leader of Mount Wuhua with their mouths agape, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Li Yundong and Su Chan were also so shocked that their eyes were about to pop out. Li Yundong stammered, "Is Ding Nan crazy? Isn't she afraid of provoking public anger and being beaten up by the crowd?" But at this time, Song Guohua, who was standing to one side, suddenly came to his senses and was the first to shout, "The leader is beautiful, the leader is mighty." The other disciples of Mount Wuhua also came to their senses and shouted in unison, "The leader is beautiful, the leader is mighty." For a moment, the side peak of Mount Longhu was filled with such passionate slogans. The expressions of Li Yundong and Su Chan became more and more strange as they listened to the slogans, "Well, I may be a little busy in the next 2 days. I won't forget what I owe everyone. After these 2 days I will definitely make it up to you." Chapter 721. Ding Nan killed Sun Qing in an instant. The cultivators on the scene could not react for a while, especially when Ding Nan did not take out her powerful magical weapon. She was even muttering her opponent's name in a low voice, so they thought that Ding Nan had used some amazing magic. "You almost there?" And after a short period of silence, the Taoist priests in gray robes roared angrily and each took out their own powerful magical weapons. The cultivators of the Jingyi school also did not want to be outdone and took out all kinds of powerful magical weapons. For a moment, the flames of war on Mount Longhu were about to start again. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were in the crowd, also found Ding Nan at this time. Deng Yu pulled her sister curiously, pointed at Ding Nan and said, "Sister, look, it seems to be Zhou Qin's follower. Her name is Ding Nan, isn't it?" Deng Jiao also widened her eyes and said curiously, "That seems to be the case. It's so strange. How did she become the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua?" Deng Yu was silent for a moment, then she sighed softly and said, "Sister, haven't we also become the sword souls of Mount Longhu?" For a moment, the two sisters looked at each other and sighed. At such a young age, many things remained the same, but the people had changed and great changes had occurred in their hearts. Zhang Ling, who was not far away from them, did not know what the sisters were thinking. She glared at the gray-robed cultivators in front of her and shouted sternly, "Yin Kong, no matter what, you are still a member of our Jingyi school. We are all of the same origin. Why are we fighting today? A middle-aged Taoist named Yin Kong chanted his Taoist name and sneered, "It's very simple. It's because we feel that Hua no longer has any true Taoist techniques. Confucius once said, if you lose the propriety, you will seek the wild. Today we are going to spread the true Tao art back to China, lest this Tao art that has been passed down for 2,000 years be destroyed by you guys." Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She said angrily, "Wow, the Japanese came before and now you guys are bringing a group of foreign devils to force us to abdicate. Good, very good. It seems that you really regard our Dragon Tiger Mountain as nothing." Yin Kong threw his head back and burst into laughter. He stroked his beard and said contemptuously, "It's because I saw you being bullied by a group of Japanese people and couldn't even fight back that I made up my mind. Now there was no true Dharma in China. True Dharma was abroad. Our country lacks faith and etiquette. Now is the time for us to repay them." Zhang Ling scolded angrily, "Bullsh*t. You guys have forgotten your ancestors. How dare you speak so arrogantly?" As the two of them argued, the cultivators on both sides also scolded them, especially the golden-haired and blue-eyed foreigners in gray Taoist robes. Many of them also spoke fluent Chinese and scolded the cultivators of the Jingyi school. However, they obviously didn't have as many tricks as these natives. They just kept saying things like bastards, idiots, dog sh*teen and so on. How could they be like Zhang Lufang and the others, who kept scolding them for a few minutes without repeating the same words? It was wonderful. In the distance, Li Yundong and Su Chan were dumbfounded when they saw the two sides scolding each other. Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, what's going on?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "I think I understand a little. It seems that the overseas branch of the Jingyi school has come back to make trouble. It should be regarded as a branch of the Jingyi school coming back to force us to abdicate?" Su Chan asked curiously, "An overseas branch? I understand. It must be a cultivator who ran away during the 10 years of turmoil. At that time they were abroad. Now that they have become successful, they have come back to compete for the position of the leader of the Jingyi school?" Li Yundong said with a strange expression, "It shouldn't be to compete for the position of the leader, right? The position of the leader of the Jingyi school and the position of the Chuanjin school are both the focus of the state. Not everyone can be the leader if they want to. If anyone comes and fights with them and wins, they can become the leader. Wouldn't the world be in chaos?" Su Chan also nodded. That makes sense. If the leader of the Jingyi school wanted to be stable, he had to be recognized by the current emperor. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to be the leader for long. While they were whispering to each other, Yin Kong suddenly shouted from below, "Zhang Ling, you know very well that my master Zhang Tianfang is also a direct descendant of Celestial Master Zhang. Why can't he inherit the position of sect leader? You object so fiercely. Are you afraid that if my master becomes the leader, your power will fall from then on? Humph, you would rather see the decline of Taoism because you are nostalgic for the power in your hands. Don't you feel ashamed?" Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body trembled. You are presumptuous. How dare you speak to me like this?" At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Well, you really came back to fight for the position of leader? Now there will be a good show to watch. The two sides will definitely fight to the death." Su Chan had never had a good impression of the Jingyi school. She laughed gloatingly and said, Well, fight, hurry up and fight." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He flicked his finger on Su Chan's forehead and glared at her. "Are you crazy? You just want to see the world in chaos." Su Chan covered her forehead and made a face at Li Yundong. She was about to refute, but Li Yundong covered her mouth and coaxed, Okay, stop talking. Let's watch the fun." Only then did the two of them look at the field again. She immediately had an idea. She raised her voice and said to Zhang Ling, "Jinren Zhang, the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua will unswervingly support you. You are the righteous sect of our Taoist Hua family. These overseas wanderers don't want to return to their country to serve. Instead, they have wild ambitions and want to come back to plot the family business of their ancestors. They are really worse than pigs and dogs." When the people of the Jingyi school heard this, they were all overjoyed. The way they looked at the people of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua became much gentler and friendlier. The Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua was just a small sect in the cultivation world of the Taoist Hua family. There were not many cultivators in the sect, and there were only a few masters in history. Compared with them, the Jingyi school was a behemoth that needed to be looked up to. Usually when they met in Jianghu, none of the cultivators of the Jingyi school looked at them seriously. Now that they saw the eyes of the Jingyi school looking at them, all of them felt as if they had drunk sweet wine. They were intoxicated as if they were floating like immortals. Zhang Ling's eyes flickered as she looked at Ding Nan. She nodded and praised her secretly. Zheng Yuan is a sinister villain, but his disciple is sensible and righteous. Not bad, not bad. However, Zhou Ping seemed to have seen through Ding Nan's wishful thinking at a glance. She snorted and said in a low voice, "Humph, this guy suddenly took over the position of leader of Zheng Yuan's sect so quickly. There must be something shameful going on. If you ask me, she's not in the right place. She wants to make friends with us and get our recognition." Zhang Ling glanced at her conspiracy theorist disciple and shook her head. Why do we care how she got the position of leader? As long as she doesn't do evil like Zheng Yuan, I don't care how she got it. Besides, she is the first cultivator from another sect who has expressed support for us. We have to accept such kindness. Otherwise, will anyone still support our Jingyi school in the future? As she said this, she stepped forward, bowed, and said in a clear voice, "I haven't asked for your name yet." Ding Nan's face lit up with joy and her eyes lit up. She didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. She jumped down from the high platform gracefully and returned the salute to Zhang Ling. "I'm Ding Nan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua." Zhang Ling smiled slightly and said, "It turns out that the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua has come to visit us. Sorry for not going out to meet you." Ding Nan was overjoyed. She knew that after Zhang Ling's words, she had been recognized by the Jingyi school as the leader of the sect. Even if others wanted to question her, they would have to think twice. Since the Jingyi school has admitted it, why wouldn't we? The two sides greeted each other, and the Taoist priests in gray robes were all furious. A tall Taoist priest pointed at Ding Nan and shouted angrily, "Who are you? Where did you come from? How dare you interrupt here?" Ding Nan wanted to kill someone here to establish her prestige, but her expression remained unchanged. She turned around with a smile and asked in a reserved and polite manner, "I haven't asked for your name yet, Jinren." The tall Taoist priest spat and said, "Bah, what name? I'm so jealous. My name is Yin Tian. What do you want? Do you want to fight with me?" Ding Nan smiled and lowered her head, a sharp light flashing in her eyes. She took advantage of the gesture of cupping her hands, touched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade hidden in her sleeve with her finger, and whispered the other party's name. Suddenly, a few ferocious spirits rushed out of Ding Nan's body again, and in the blink of an eye, they rushed in front of Yin Tian. Yin Tian had seen Ding Nan's killing methods before, so he had been hiding in the dark. When he suddenly saw these spirits rushing over, he was shocked. He immediately shouted and stuck a talisman in front of him. Just as he was about to recite a spell, he suddenly felt his feet go numb. It turned out that Ding Nan had instructed the threaded hairpin of soul traversing the ground to sneak up behind Yin Tian and suddenly stab the Yongquan point in his feet from underground. Yin Tian roared and his mind suddenly trembled. He felt that the threaded hairpin of soul traversing jade was madly sucking his Jinchi underground. He wanted to resist, but the spirits of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had already rushed in front of him, roaring and dragging his soul out. Although Yin Tian himself was also a Jinshin master, the threaded hairpin of soul-traversing jade was a rare powerful magical weapon with the effect of breaking through defense. Moreover, after absorbing the Jinchi of Gu Feng and Yi Yu of the Fox Zen school, as well as Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua, his spiritual energy had also become very powerful. In addition, with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in front of him to lure the enemy, all of Yin Tian's Jinchi was used to defend the front. Therefore, the threaded hairpin of soul-traversing jade's sneak attack was successful, causing a Jinshin master to be killed in an instant. This time, even Li Yundong, a great master with rich experience in fighting, was shocked. He couldn't help but exclaim, "This Ding Nan is really shameless and insidious. This is too insidious and too difficult to defend against. Even I, if I'm caught off guard, I'm afraid I'll fall for it." Although the Jinshin of cultivators was powerful, not all of their bodies were protected by it, especially the gushing spring at the soles of people's feet. This was a place that very few people would use the power of Jinshin to protect. Even if someone wanted to protect it, it would be much weaker than other places. Ding Nan had taken advantage of this mentality of the other party and successfully launched a sneak attack, killing the cultivator who had spoken rudely to her in front of everyone. At this time, when everyone saw that Yin Tian had been sucked dry in the blink of an eye, they all burst into an uproar. The cultivator in the gray Taoist robe looked at Ding Nan in horror, and for a moment, many people were so frightened by her that they took a step back. However, because Su Chan had been entangled with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade several times, she suddenly said to Li Yundong, "Yundong, this seems to be the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. "Yes, now that you mention it, it must be Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon that has fallen into Ding Nan's hands." The two of them could see that the cultivator in the gray Taoist robe was also sharp-eyed and had seen some clues. Yin Kong whispered a few words to a foreign Taoist priest with golden hair and blue eyes beside him. The foreigner looked at Ding Nan with some fear, but then Yin Kong patted him on the shoulder. Only then did he swallow hard, walk up to the arena, and say loudly in a strange Chinese accent, "Do you dare to fight me one-on-one?" When Ding Nan saw that a foreigner had come up to challenge her, she immediately burst out laughing. The disciples of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua also roared with laughter. Song Guohua even shouted at the top of his lungs, "Leader of Mount Wuhua, I am so powerful that I am the only one in the world." Ding Nan had defeated two people in a row, especially one who was a powerful Jinshin master. The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in her sleeve had swallowed the soul of this Jinshin master, and her spiritual energy had soared. Her self-confidence had swelled unprecedentedly. She pointed at the foreigner and said loudly, "Tell me your name. I don't kill nameless people." The foreigner swallowed hard and stammered, "My name is Adriano Chevalier, Adolphus Branné, David Frederick Hamburg, John Martin Ned, Paul Rodenfeld, Schallman, Thomas Victor, William and Skirches, Zeus Wolf, Demat Sendernier, Rome Hanks Schilds." At first, Ding Nan listened with a smile on her face, but the more she listened, the more stunned she became. When she heard the foreigner mention Hank Schill, she couldn't help but shout, "Why is your name so long?" The foreigner smiled and said seriously, This is just my surname. I haven't said my name yet." Ding Nan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was dull, and the corners of her eyes couldn't help twitching. She stared blankly at the foreigner who was stammering her name and couldn't say anything for a while. When the cultivators of the various sects heard the foreigner say their names for more than a minute, they all looked at him dumbfounded and speechless. Ding Nan had a splitting headache and was sweating profusely. She glared at the foreigner angrily and thought to herself, "Could it be that they found out that I was using the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and deliberately sent a guy with such a long name to deal with me?" The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade was indeed a powerful magical weapon that was once known to be invincible in the world. In particular, it could be upgraded infinitely and was extremely difficult to guard against. However, it had a major shortcoming, which was that the user had to know the other party's name and use the other party's name to lock onto the other party before it could be used against the enemy. Otherwise, this magical weapon was no different from ordinary jade. Ding Nan glared at the foreigner angrily and shouted, "Are you messing with me? How could a person's name be so long?" The foreigner still smiled and said, "I was born in southern Sweden. When I was 5 years old, my parents hadn't given me a name yet. This violated the Swedish surname law, so they were fined 5,000 kronor. My parents were so angry that they gave me such a long name. It's really a little hard to remember, isn't it?" Ding Nan was so angry that she gritted her teeth and said angrily, "Do you dare to repeat your name again?" The foreigner was indeed honest. He honestly repeated his surname again. This time he was much more fluent and quickly said his name. Ding Nan listened attentively to his name and wanted to remember it, but halfway through she felt dizzy and had a headache. How could she remember the rest of the name? When the foreigner finished, Ding Nan stood motionless and did not speak for a long time. After a long time, the corner of her mouth twitched, and her expression was dull. She glared at the foreigner with extremely depressed eyes, snorted angrily and turned to leave. At this time, Li Yundong, who was on the top of the mountain, had already laughed so hard that he almost fell off the mountain. As he wiped his tears, he burst into laughter and said, "Oh, Ding Nan must be crying in her heart. Damn it, why did you give me such a long name? Are you kidding me?" She fell into Li Yundong's arms, covered her stomach and giggled. "I've cultivated for 10 years to reach the Jinshin phase, but it's not as long as someone else's name. Well, the former Fox's Nest Group 9 was disbanded by a dear book friend. Now it's reopened. If you want to join, hurry up. 5890697. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.